A voice in the darkness declared that humanity wouldn't survive at this rate. The guy was running amidst monsters that were wiping out people. He couldn't figure out how to fight them, so he decided to create a magic circle. In a hurry, the young man completed the spell and struck a huge monster with defensive magic, creating a wall of water around it. He hoped the magic would work, but the monster kept getting closer, and it was too late. A death message appeared in the game, and then the session ended. The guy took off his VR headset, confused about how he lost. He cursed, remembering the deaths of over 2 million people, and realized it was a popular VR history simulator. Later, he thought that students might enjoy such a game. His dozing friend asked if he had played it. The guy confirmed it, saying the topic might interest the class. This was 630 years ago in the game Deus Ex Machina. Magic beasts had overrun the world, so combat spells and magical tools were forbidden to protect people. His classmate perked up, saying he'd only played once but couldn't use magic. Then he asked if high-class forbidden magic was allowed during the game. Minato replied that a novice like him could cause a magical explosion, so it was dangerous. Standing in the magic storage, he asked his friend not to be angry and began to create a magic circle. In their world, offensive magic was forbidden, but almost everyone was taught everyday magic, which made life much more convenient. Minato created a can of cold coffee and handed it to his friend. At that moment, a 27-meter, 30-ton magical carriage crashed into the building. Speeding at 300 km/h, the magical carriage slammed into the building, causing the floor he and his colleague were standing on to collapse. His colleague screamed into the void, trying to find him, never imagining he would die in such a way. He saw no wounds on himself and wondered if he was alive, as he was definitely crushed to death. Before losing consciousness, he heard someone calling his name, and it was likely that person was still alive. He wanted to understand where he was, and judging by the surroundings, he wondered if it was a forest. He reasoned that he had no specific injuries on his body, so he wondered if he was in a hospital. He then thought, could this be the place everyone talks about, and decided that it was. He decided to try using magic to retrieve a notebook and pen from his storage, if he could manage to do it. He was delighted to find an item that could extract magic, a magical electronic terminal. Although it was a very old model, he could use it to call for help. Hoping the device worked, he turned it on and it powered up. He asked where he was and the device replied, "Mini a forest." He was happy that the voice worked, but saddened that he didn't know the place. He thought he had never heard of this place, but he asked the device to show him a map. The device responded that there were unidentified areas and asked if he wanted to see them. He answered affirmatively. The terminal showed him unidentified regions, natural mountains and rivers, and ancient architecture. He said that this world was nothing like his own. He concluded that he had somehow reincarnated into another world. Seeing a skull and crossbones symbol, he pondered its meaning. Then he saw magical beasts and was surprised. He considered that all magical beasts had died out in his modern world, and he didn't know how to fight them. If he encountered a magical beast here, how could he save himself? The terminal said he could win if he used offensive magic. He replied, "What can you expect from a guy who lived in peacetime?" The terminal insisted that he had to fight. The terminal wanted to show him the details, and he commanded it to do so. When the terminal displayed them, he was astonished to see magical circles containing offensive spells. He was shocked because he was seeing them for the first time. A normal person could only dream of seeing them. Offensive magical spells carry a lot of information. He was glad that with offensive magical spells, he could defeat the beasts. He touched one spell, wanting to know what it did. The terminal announced that it was a power spell. Suddenly, the terminal cut out before finishing its sentence. He was annoyed that the terminal was broken. He lay there thinking that all he had left were magical spells for everyday life. He remembered how he used to create a magic circle and a water orb. He still remembered some magic circles and thought he could restore them, even if it required certain preparations. He wanted to restore them in the simplest way possible and then heard a call for help. He turned around and was surprised to see a person, and he had a bad feeling. A boy was galloping on a horse, calling for help. An enormous, terrifying monster was bearing down on him. He realized that, unlike in a VR game, this monster was emitting a genuine intent to kill. The boy lay there and the monster was about to attack him. The young man wondered how he could save him and if he even could. He didn't know how powerful the offensive spells he'd seen were. But if he didn't do anything, the man would die. He decided there was no other choice and jumped onto the wagon. He thought that even if it didn't work, at least he could distract the monster. He activated a magic circle. The target was identified, the monster's reflection was in his eyes. He aimed the attack. He activated the lightning spear. He yelled that the circle was huge and he couldn't hold it for long. He decided to unleash it. Smoke billowed from the circle's power, raising a large cloud of dust, and the monster was stunned. The monster was spun around with insane force, and the blade struck the ground, cutting it into pieces. The monster continued to be spun and killed by the magic, while the man lay there, astonished by the spectacle. The monster died lying on the mangled ground, with a faint wisp of smoke rising from its carcass. He was amazed that he had managed to kill the monster with magic. He realized that the power of offensive magic was incredible. The man the monster had been chasing was crying, asking what kind of power that was. He confirmed that offensive magic was indeed rare in this world too, and he was glad he had been able to use it. The man rushed over to him, introducing himself as the merchant Jitlai, and offered to pay him for his help. He thought the young man was a high-level adventurer and said they could settle it later. He introduced himself as Minato and also thanked the merchant for saving his life. The merchant couldn't understand how he could have saved him. Minato thought he couldn't tell him he had reincarnated, his terminal was broken, and asked him to show him the way. The merchant was surprised to find a map inside the strange box. Minato realized he didn't know what a magic information terminal was, having encountered it in this world, and he didn't understand his own lack of knowledge. He couldn't grasp what was happening or what he should do next. The merchant looked at him, sensing his distress, and told him not to make such a face. He offered to take him to the nearest town, and Minato agreed. Jitlai told Minato that his power was immense and that he should wait for the wild boar he had killed. He then suggested they head to the Adventurers Guild in town. The merchant assured him not to worry about money, saying it was his turn to help him now. Minato thanked him. Jitlai commented that despite his strength, he still got lost in the forest, wondering if he had been training there. The young man replied that if it weren't for him, he might have died, and he was simply returning kindness with kindness. The merchant said that was an excellent explanation and he understood completely, then handed him an apple. As he reached for it, Minato thought the merchant was a good guy. The merchant asked if he was all right, and Minato replied positively, thinking about how little he knew about the current world. Jitlai said they shouldn't delay, as new monsters would appear when it got dark, and they set off. He explained that they were heading towards Mania, a thriving city where many new adventurers gathered, and he was sure the young man would like it. Minato ate the apple and asked if adventurers were people who traveled the world. Minato remarked that the apple was delicious. White birds flew across the sky. There stood a massive tower with 13 Deus Ex Machina written on it. He was surprised that the gears of fate had begun to turn. The carriage was so bumpy that his backside started to ache. He spotted a small creature. He was surprised he had never seen such beasts in his own world and thought it looked harmless. The small creatures were climbing a tree, and the merchant warned him that they were poisonous and not to touch them. The merchant used the map to determine their route and showed it to him. Pointing to the city, he said, "That's the city of Mania." The merchant mentioned that the nearest town was half a day's carriage ride away, and he doubted anyone would make such a journey alone. The guard at the gate welcomed him to Mania and asked if he was accompanied by Jitlai. He had thought this world would be different from his civilized one, with no better transport than carriages. He answered the guard affirmatively, thinking that he didn't look strong because of the cloak Jitlai had given him. Jitlai hugged him, saying they had to part ways. He told Minato it had been an honor to meet him and to reach out in the future if he ever needed anything. They said their goodbyes. Minato watched Jitlai until he disappeared from sight. They say the Adventurers Guild is the best place to sell monster parts. Minato found the guild building. He thought, so this is where adventurers gather. He had heard there were many newcomers here, but everyone he saw looked stronger than him. He remembered Jitlai explaining that the guild's main tasks were reconnaissance and monster extermination. First, they had to register with the guild. Second, newcomers like him had to undergo training at the Novice Center. Adventurers progress through Novice, then Veteran, and finally reach Master status. Mania was a good place to gain experience. He saw quests on the board, all for monster extermination. For example, there were tasks like Mania Rabbit. Quests were divided by rank, and the reward was indicated. Seeing a Mania Bull quest, he was stunned, wondering if novices could really defeat them. He looked for suitable quests, noting he had many everyday spells and one offensive spell, and realized the monster he had killed wasn't listed here. There were also quests like gathering flowers in Misikuer. Under different windows were tables for purchasing materials and for quests. He realized it was time to approach the registration desk. He still had money from Jitli, but he needed to start earning his own. He approached the registration desk. A sign read Guild, Mania, Secretary, Shiera. The girl there was searching for something and couldn't find it. She greeted him and asked if it was his first time at the guild. He replied yes. The girl handed him a simplified form that only required 3 entries. He thought the girl was tall. As he filled out the form, he realized he didn't have a weapon and had never used one, so he checked the corresponding box. Today, he had learned an offensive spell and filled in the form that he was a mage. He figured he didn't need a weapon just yet, but if he did, he'd buy one. He suddenly realized he understood the language of this world, wondering if it was an effect of reincarnation. He thought it was for the best, and then the girl asked if he was finished. She took the form from him and asked if he was really a mage. He was surprised and asked if something was wrong, to which she reiterated, "You're a mage, but you don't have a magic wand." He asked if he needed a wand. She pulled one out of a cabinet and handed it to him, telling him to try it out. She explained it was for stabilizing and increasing his magic. If he lost control, it could be dangerous for his teammates. He stood there, stunned that it was just a plain, ordinary stick, but he asked if he could use it. She affirmed, telling him to see for himself how useful it was. Holding the stick in his hands, he wondered if it was truly useful. He tried to draw a circle with the stick, just as he used to draw with a quill. He conjured a ball of light, and the girl was amazed by the light magic. He said he felt a surging power within him. Impressed by the light magic, the girl said Minato would do well in dungeons. He, however, thought he'd die in a dungeon if he used that spell there. He had learned the light orb spell back in elementary school to go to the bathroom at night. He felt that channeling magic through a wand took too long and didn't provide stability. The girl was delighted by the huge ball of light, but he decided he wouldn't use it. He initially thought the girl was instructed to praise newcomers to boost their confidence, but then he dismissed that idea, thinking she was trying to sell him something. At that moment, he imagined a scammer selling shoddy goods to a woman. The girl said that light magic was very important in dark dungeons. He thanked her, said he'd think about it, and considered returning the wand. Holding the wand, the girl said it was wonderful and asked if he had any other attributes besides light. He was puzzled by this question. He couldn't answer, and the girl realized they hadn't been tested for attributes. She searched the cabinet and pulled out some crystals. She said the crystals would help find his attributes. As she held them out to him, she asked him to touch them. He wondered if she was going to try and sell them to him. He nervously touched the crystals and both lit up. The girl said that besides light, he also had darkness, which was a rare combination. He asked if that was good or bad, feeling a strange premonition. In his past world, even though he was weak, he could control all 6 elements. These attributes were used to create magic circles: wind, earth, fire, water, light, and darkness. He hadn't heard of anyone possessing any attributes, so he touched the other crystals. All the crystals lit up, and the girl exclaimed that he possessed all attributes, wondering if he was a sage. He asked if it was strange to be a sage, and she shouted that it was, of course, extremely unusual. He thought it was just a trick to sell something. The girl mentioned that 5 years ago, the royal army's chief mage had died, but no one was around when it happened. People heard mage and thought they misheard. People looked at him in surprise, wondering how a novice could be a sage. He realized this wasn't just praise and confirmed that very few people could use 6 attributes. He recalled a feeling. It was nice to be recognized, but it had made him a slave to the company, with everyone coming to him for help. He decided that being a sage meant losing his freedom. He declared that the result was incorrect. The crystals then glowed from the residual effect of the light orb, leaving the girl puzzled. He believed that among all attributes, he was strongest in wind magic, and if he was careful, everything would be fine. He asked to try again. He had to release no magical energy and concentrate on his fingertip. He pressed the crystal, thinking he had succeeded. Everyone was discussing how it was a shame he wasn't a sage. The girl asked why he was so agitated, and others also affirmed that he had good abilities for reconnaissance. He asked if his registration was complete. She told him he was a mage controlling 5 attributes besides wind and handed him a guild card. Minato's rank was also written on the card. The beginner's camp brochure contained all the details. The girl told Minato to attend the Adventurer Novice lectures as well. She signed him up for the nearest lecture. The girl told Minato that Adventurer Novice training was much harder than he thought, advising him not to eat too much and to try his best. Minato arrived at the training grounds, standing by a wooden fence. He wondered with interest what new things he would learn at the adventurer's camp. Attributes and wands didn't matter, but magic in this life had to be different from the magic of his past life. Novices were sparring with swords on the training ground, and it was unknown what awaited Minato, the sage. As the novices fought, their leader arrived. He asked them why 3 of them still couldn't defeat one, pointing out that monsters were stronger and faster than humans. Minato thought this was the beginner's class and remembered the girl warning him not to go there on a full stomach. The leader pointed to a guy sitting down and told him to fix how much he was distancing himself from the opponent, but praised his sword skills, which meant he could defeat the rabbit. Turning to the others, he told them they were working weakly and shouldn't underestimate the monster. He told them to rest for now. The beginner's class is for people to discover their strengths and what tasks they are suited for. The leader said the guy who wielded 5 elements would be next. Minato clenched his fists and asked if he also had to fight, to which the instructor just chuckled. The young man sighed as if a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. The instructor laughed, saying he wouldn't have to fight since he was a mage. He said he had heard about him and asked if he could use offensive magic. The young man replied that he only knew 1 spell, and the instructor responded that it was enough for a beginner. He gave him the task of choosing one of the targets and hitting it precisely. The young man remembered the girl asking him if he was sure he wanted to register as a mage and thought that mages were treated strangely here. He stood contemplating, looking at the 5 targets. He realized they wanted to test his attack speed and began creating a magic circle. With a wave of his hand, the young man created a magic circle. The instructor was surprised he did it without a wand. The young man said he wasn't a master of offensive magic but would be careful, focusing on speed. He prepared the circle. The target was detected. The countdown began. Minato raised the circle with his hands, saying each strike would take about 2 seconds. The second passed. Everyone was shocked by what they saw. The 3rd and 4th seconds passed. People grabbed onto the wooden structures to avoid being blown away, and finally the last 5th second arrived, and an explosion thundered. All 5 targets were incinerated. The people on the training ground were stunned. Minato breathed a sigh of relief and wiped away sweat. He looked at the burning targets and asked if he had overdone it. The instructor said he couldn't believe his eyes. The instructor said he had never seen such magic used before, explaining that these targets had multi-layered protection and couldn't be burned by ordinary magic. The instructor called for Magicus to help as he couldn't handle it alone. A guy with black and white hair appeared, introducing himself as Magicus, the magic instructor of the Mania Guild. Minato was surprised. Magicus descended with a magic wand, surprised that a beginner possessed the power to use offensive magic. Pointing the wand at the card, he was convinced that the young man wielded magic. Minato, watching magic form around the wand, was upset and asked if mages couldn't fight here. Magicus confirmed, explaining that mages stand behind swordsmen and archers, playing a support role. Minato told himself that he now understood why mages were treated that way, imagining the receptionist apologizing for it. The mage explained that he uses magic to create precise conditions for swordsmen and archers to attack like blinding enemies, and said that the guy could deal immense damage. The young man asked if they could use offensive magic since he had studied it, but they told him no. The mage said that he could become the main attacker in any high-ranking squad. The instructor and the others were stunned to hear this, and Minato was surprised, saying he was now a true adventurer. They shook hands. The mage offered to write a letter of recommendation if he ever wanted to become the head of the country. Minato politely declined. The young man said that ruling a country he knew nothing about would be suicide, especially since he had registered as an adventurer, and the mage agreed. After a moment of thought, the young man asked why some mages were weak in offensive magic. The instructor and the mage were taken aback by this question. The instructor replied that they weren't weak but perfectly normal. The mage explained that the best adventurer mages could use lightning magic like Minato, but only in rare cases as it was very mana-intensive, with mana running out after 3 strikes. The young man was surprised, holding his terminal and calculating that if each strike consumed so much energy, he could use up all 500. He was amazed that the spells on the device were so cool and thanked them, noting he had only managed to learn one. It wouldn't be surprising if he encountered beasts resistant to lightning magic. The young man imagined casting a spell for certain death on a bull, only for the bull to take no damage. He said he wanted to learn more offensive spells and asked if there were any books on them. The instructor and the mage were surprised, as the young man was already so strong without them. The young man was disappointed that he only knew one offensive spell. The receptionist told him that if he wanted to train his magic, he could find monsters in the forest on the north side of the city. He thanked her and left. Waving goodbye, the girl thought he was a determined young man. The young man reached the forest, found a book, and wondered what to do next. He remembered the girl who told him to try his best and love his job. Looking at how many pages were in the book, he wasn't sure he would read it all. The mage had said that the book of magic spells was good for advanced levels. He began to open the book to find out what offensive spells existed in this world, and was surprised why mages who read such books were so weak. He thought he had missed something important. The theory of the magic circle is used for peaceful purposes. He pondered this and summoned his magic storage. The magic circle formed. He followed all the instructions, placed his palm on the circle, copied, transferred, and transcribed it into his notebook. He was able to create the fire magic that the instructor used and thought that this signified power. He sat there thinking that the magic circle for the lightning spell was too simple with too much repetition, and some parts even blended into the flow. He decided to remove the unnecessary spells, believing that doing so would reduce the magic circle's creation time from 10 minutes to just 1 minute. He then constructed the magic circle. He confirmed that without the superfluous elements, the spell became even more potent. He thought that by using his school knowledge, he could improve magic circles and become a powerful adventurer. He sat pleased with his success when a girl passing by was surprised to find she wasn't alone in the forest. He held a notebook labeled Minato's Secret, which he called his homemade book of offensive magic, and was about to cast a spell. The girl, hidden, watched, wanting to understand what he was doing. He created a magic circle. The circle glowed. He realized the magic circle was absorbing mana through his body. He felt his palm tense, then raised it, performing the dance of the fiery vortex. He was thrilled that it worked, but immediately realized he had burned everything around him, so he created water magic. He commanded a blessing of rain, and it began to pour. The girl standing behind him was stunned by what she saw. Delighted, he wanted to try a couple more spells, and the girl continued to watch him. He woke up to the bright morning sun. He yawned, realizing he was truly in another world as he looked at the newcomers in the dining hall. He was served breakfast, and they asked if he had slept well. A person, seeing him with a book, asked if he was improving with a manual on offensive magic. He replied that although he had learned many improved spells, he had stayed up late and gotten too engrossed in his studies. The person said he was speaking strangely, as people in this world don't improve their magic. If he was a traveler, he should go to the guild for a quest. Minato was intrigued. He had enough jitly money for a while, but he thought he should try out the improved quests. The guild was full of people eager to get the Mania Guild bulletins. He asked a girl if quests were available, but she shouted at him that he was too late and told him to leave. Scanning the quests, he found one where someone was willing to pay 300,000 zigs for the use of several offensive spells. He was thrilled that he could do it, having once heard that mages only earn 100,000 a month. He could also test his offensive spells without encountering monsters. The crowd laughed at him. One of them said that mornings in Mania begin with a battle for quests. Minato was swallowed by the crowd of people. The girl said this was his first lesson. He grabbed the quest and asked the girl if it was dangerous. She replied no, explaining it was a simple task to collect magic stones in the ruins, perfectly safe for a rank 1 adventurer. The girl thought that beginners usually failed this quest because there were hardly any stones left in the ruins. She mentioned that if he had a higher rank, she would recommend other quests. She yelled at him to raise his rank quickly. He then remembered the guide mentioned a ranking system for adventurers where higher ranks offered greater rewards. To increase his rank, the first condition was to successfully complete quests and demonstrate his combat abilities and achievements. The second condition was to pass tests given by mentors. He remarked that it sounded troublesome. He said he would take the quest and focus on testing his improved spells, and the girl agreed. To find magic stones, he needed to locate the least explored area. Places near the city were likely picked clean, so he decided to start with the farthest locations and gradually work his way closer. He thought to himself while in the area that he would begin right there. His stomach rumbled and he realized he was hungry and needed to eat lunch. He had been worried about his eating habits when he first settled here, but the innkeeper had made him some pastries. Biting into one, he thought they were simple but delicious. As he sat down to eat, a girl approached him from behind, drawn by the smell of the food. He asked where this little creature came from, then offered her a pastry, and they both began to eat. The girl then said he was the person with the fire flower. He didn't understand her words at first, then figured she must have seen him practicing his improved spells. Watching her eat, he thought she really did resemble a small animal. She commented that the food was lovely, then remembered that he had caused it to rain. She asked him where he was going, and he replied that he was headed to the ruins to collect magic stones. She pointed to a mountain and asked if that's where he was going. Minato confirmed it, adding that he planned to explore the farthest spot. She said it was a bit exciting beyond the triangle. He asked her to clarify and she confirmed, saying her heart pounded with excitement there. She mentioned there were treasures and monsters there, but she thought he could handle them. He asked her, perhaps wanting to confirm if she doubted him. She introduced herself as Amy and he told her his name. She then said she had to run, having forgotten about a test. He sat there, surprised that she had a sword and wanted to become an adventurer. As she ran off, he wished her good luck with her test. He reached the ruins, which were rumored to be safe, but he decided to stay alert and be cautious. He noticed the reinforced concrete and wondered why the buildings in Mania were old-fashioned, yet the ruins seemed more advanced. He recalled Amy calling the ruins exciting and thought she might have been trying to warn him about something, making him ponder the civilization of this world. He found a hidden door with an inscription that read, "Use magical power to open the door." He thought it seemed simple enough and felt as if no one had opened this door before him. As he touched a step on the staircase, a dagger suddenly pointed directly at him. Something eerie emerged from inside the hole. He couldn't quite understand what it was, but the knives were thrown aside, and he was surprised to realize it was a knife monster. Holding them in his hands, he remarked that they looked more like a magical machine than a monster, observing their active legs and concluding that it had tried to attack him. He remembered Amy saying he would manage, but he hadn't found any magic stones or tried out new spells. He decided that the girl's words were his motivation, and he needed to press on. As he walked through the tunnel, he noticed the air felt stale. Cobwebs were everywhere, and he wondered aloud why this place hadn't been explored. The administrator had said this was a relatively safe mission, but he had been attacked, so he knew he needed to be more careful. Stopping before a door, he found it suspicious. He knocked, but there was no answer, leading him to believe it was locked. Perhaps behind this closed door lay a place no adventurer had ever set foot in. He decided it was time to test his improved spells and began to construct a magic circle. Using a powerful stream of fire from his fire cannon, he blasted the door open. The moment the door opened, a multitude of knife monsters lunged at him. He conjured an ice cannon, a fire cannon, and a wind cannon, concluding that this mission was definitely not for a beginner. He was surprised that his improved spells weren't working and he couldn't land a decisive blow. Plus, there were too many knives. He thought he would die if he got hit and decided to calm himself down. He was debating which spell to use. He had neutralized some of them, and by a rough estimate, about 100 remained. He remembered lightning magic, recalling that it was used to deal with uncontrolled magical machines. Initially, the spell only shot one lightning spear, but he had improved it and could now release several copies in half a second. He directed the magic at the monster's knives, praying it would work. All the attacking knives fell to the floor, and he breathed a sigh of relief. Constantly using lightning magic was more draining than he thought. He had spent a lot of energy just to get there, hoping it was worth it. The administrator was surprised that Minato brought in 240 blue magic stones. One stone was worth 30,000 zigs. The young man calmly confirmed it. She mentioned that the most they had ever received was about 100, and these stones were very rare and high quality. He said he just got lucky and asked if the guild could buy them. In his head, he calculated that it would be 7,200,000 zigs. She assured him they certainly had the funds. She told him it was a great achievement, enough to raise his rank and a chance for him to climb the rankings. She said he needed to complete a subjugation test to demonstrate all his combat abilities. Looking at the tasks, he said it would suit him. He explained that first and foremost, he had come to Mania to sell one item, and he asked everyone to step back before summoning his storage magic. He pulled out a huge boar and threw it onto the floor. Everyone was shocked and asked where he got it from. He thought that people in this world had small storage capacities. Suddenly, Jitli appeared and said he couldn't explain yet why his storage had slightly larger dimensions. Everyone was shocked. In the old world, the carrying capacity was 3 tons, but in this world, it was 30 tons. He asked if there was a quest to subjugate this monster. People looked at the monster and said it was a bast boar, a rather strong monster. The administrator said he had raised his rank. The first condition was to successfully complete a quest and demonstrate combat abilities. The second condition for rank advancement was to pass a test given by the instructor. The girl called the instructor, saying a test was needed for re-evaluation. Minato was taken aback and told them to wait. He stated that he didn't want to raise his rank right now. The instructor said he had passed and the rank up test was approved. The administrator then said the instructor had informed her that Mr. Minato was an exception and didn't need to take the test. Others were shocked. The girl congratulated Minato on his rank up, and he stood there, processing it. Everyone rushed to congratulate Minato. Some invited him to hunt, while others warned him about the dangers and told him he could now take on higher-ranked quests. He approached the quest board to pick up a new assignment. He chose a simple, unranked quest to gather muscular grass, but people shouted at him not to take it. Standing near the special training center, he wondered what he thought about it all. He took another quest and was surprised to find it was a morning quest, offering 300,000 zigs for shooting offensive spells. People explained that if an adventurer fails a quest, it gets reposted, so thorough preparation is essential. Someone mentioned that another person had stolen his morning quest. This quest was offered by wisdom seekers, and before starting, there would be a test to check the destructive power of spells. The young man found this intriguing. People said the quest givers were important figures who rarely posted quests, and they were surprised he didn't know who they were. The wisdom seekers are a 2-person group, consisting of a mage and a swordsman, focused on researching ancient runes. The quest description stated that one could decline the trial after learning its nature. The young man thought the quest wasn't too difficult, and if he wanted to learn about ruins and magical machines, it was worth taking on. He decided he would first figure out who they were. The young man became lost in thought. He went to meet them and was surprised to find that the wisdom seekers were 2 young women. They were also discussing him. Suddenly, the mage shouted, pointing at something, saying a monster was coming. The young man wanted to know where the monsters were and how they got there. Amy also didn't understand what was happening with Maina. Maina asked him how he had so much mana. He asked if she was asking him. Amy explained that Maina could see others' mana using her magic vision. He was surprised by this. They told him Minato could use 5 attributes. He thought the mage was avoiding him. Looking at the girl, he thought she had a special ability, magic vision. He felt shy when she looked back at him. She told Amy that he possessed all 6 attributes, and he was scared of being exposed. Amy said that more attributes meant more power and he could help them. Maina didn't understand why Amy was so calm. The young man thought Amy cared more about success than how many attributes he had. Maina whispered that the man's mana was comparable to an archdragon's. Amy exclaimed that he couldn't be human, and the mage confirmed that she also thought he looked like a monster. He stood there thinking they needed to learn some tact. Maina was the brains of the team and Amy was the brawn. He needed to earn their trust. They trembled with fear when he asked if there was a test. The mage told him to hit a target with fire magic. The target was a toy. He created a magic circle and released fire butterflies that flew precisely into the target. The girls were stunned by the sight, commenting on how beautiful it was. The butterflies instantly incinerated the toy, and the girls remarked that it was deadly. Amy pointed out that the target was above the burnt rabbit, and he said that was enough, thinking he had messed up. The mage thought his magic was strange and powerful. He figured if she avoided him, they would accept him. Amy ran up to the guy asking what kind of spell that was, amazed by what she had seen. He, thinking she didn't care about anything, replied that he had learned it from a book. As he showed the book, the mage rushed over, exclaiming that it was an offensive magic guide. She asked how much he had read, and he replied that he had read the entire book. She took the book and declared that Minato had passed the test, and those who carried such a book couldn't be bad. He thought she was obsessed with grimoires. She said she was going to get rid of the old toys anyway, so it was fine that he burned it. He thought she wasn't afraid of him anymore. She said the spell was very beautiful and she liked it. The fact that he had returned the book to the guild library worked in his favor. He imagined the administrator asking him to return the book. Maina said that spell wasn't described in the book and only a great mage could perform it, but there was something else that worried her. He thought she was wary of him again. Just then, Amy ran over and asked to discuss the mission. Amy was extremely eager for a fight to get a lot of treasure, while Maina poured them tea. Amy asked if he understood, but he thought he hadn't understood anything from her explanation. He asked Maina to explain the plan of action. He did understand one thing, though. They wanted to explore ruins, but there were many monsters in them, and she needed an ally to help defeat them. They said they needed to get ready. He had a feeling this wasn't a simple quest where he just had to cast a couple of offensive spells. He told them he hadn't decided whether to join yet, and his words stunned them. He thought it was a bad idea to rush headfirst into something without knowing the full story. He believed it was always important to sign contracts carefully, reminding them that the quest description stated he could decline after learning the details. Amy shouted that she wanted to go with him, mentioning there was a lot of treasure. Maina tried to explain, but Amy wouldn't let her speak. Maina stated that the quest guaranteed 30,000 zigs, and on top of that, he would receive half of the spoils after successfully exploring the ruins. Amy exclaimed that this was different from the original plan. Minato grew suspicious, wondering why they were offering half instead of a third. It seemed too good to be true. She asked him what he thought, and he agreed with her assessment. Maina calmed Amy down, explaining that they had initially planned to hire 10 people, with each receiving 5%, so the overall reward remained the same. Amy, surprised, accepted this. He asked if they had planned to hire 9 more people, pondering their words that the plan remained the same but still had questions. Maina explained that she had wanted to rely on numbers, but besides him, they hadn't found anyone else who could effectively wield offensive magic. He realized that few in this world were capable of using such magic. Maina said he was stronger than the 10 people they needed. She would guide and he would attack, possibly making her assistance unnecessary. Both women stared intently at him and he pondered his decision. He considered that they had initially offered him 5% of the loot, then increased the reward. He recalled how a former colleague, after suddenly quitting, ended up doing double the work for the same pay. He asked how dangerous the job was, thinking this was the crucial point. The girls were surprised. Maina countered by asking if any adventures were truly without danger. He chuckled to himself, thinking that these young women were starting to exude the aura of seasoned adventurers. Amy said that if things got too hot, she could just run away, and Maina confirmed she did the same. He thought that if he couldn't rely on them, he would have to handle everything himself, just as he always had in his previous life. The adventurer profession seemed liberating to him, and he would receive half of the spoils. Plus, he had spells that could ensure his escape in an unforeseen situation. He shook their hands, saying he looked forward to working together, deciding he needed to solidify his reputation as an adventurer. The night before their departure, the 3 of them stood talking. Amy boasted about her speed, and Maina claimed she was just as fast. He couldn't sleep, he was too excited. He decided to get up, thinking that Amy would be the first to face the monsters, as mages typically played a support role. He didn't want to be protected. Half of the spoils would be his, and he needed to put in the effort. As he improved his spells, he became familiar with their mechanics, eventually conceiving the idea of creating his own spell, starting with the basics. He thought the book contained the simplest magic circles, requiring little mana, and offered tricks that could be cast for extended periods. He imagined Maina's reaction. Based on these, he wanted to create a powerful offensive spell that required little mana but possessed immense power. He created the spell and, after looking at the magic circle, decided it would require 80% of his mana. He rephrased the incantation and wanted to see how powerful it turned out to be. Its power was astonishing. He decided to save it for later, thinking that if the spell went out of control, all three of them would perish. He arrived at the ruins, but the girls weren't there. This displeased him. Suddenly, he heard the sound of a monster. He found the girls. They were about to attack a bat. Manga warned that its magic was accumulating on its horn. Amy went on the offensive. Manga said it was a Messiah bat. If they had taken on a quest, they would have earned at least 30,000 zigs. Amy teased Minato, saying they handled the monster without his help. Amy stood covered in blood, gripping the monster's head, and declared it was now Minato's turn to kill monsters. It looked quite bloodthirsty, and he wanted to avoid monsters more often. Manga told her to wipe off the blood. They moved through the ruins effortlessly. Manga suggested they go down the spiral staircase. He watched, thinking about the kind of ruins Manga and Amy had discovered. To follow them, he had to use enhancement magic. He thought they were moving faster than other rookies. He commented on how vast the place was. They told him they would go all the way to the bottom. It was the first time he had seen such extensive ruins. The entrance was overgrown with dense plants, and the stone was quite solid. To get in, one needed to be perceptive and experienced in exploring ruins. He thought Manga had found this place, but she said Amy was the one who discovered it. Amy said she simply stumbled upon these ruins while walking around. Amy caught a pleasant scent and followed it. He thought ordinary people didn't have such a keen sense of smell. She was special. She had found a treasure. He was amazed by her abilities, calling her a genius at ruin exploration. Sniffing around, she discovered something else interesting. He thought she was like a treasure hound. He gazed at the spot where she found the treasure, thinking he wouldn't have found anything, and wondered if she was unconsciously using search spells. He remembered that she had also sniffed him during their first meeting and was surprised, wondering if she had sensed something in him. He asked if she had found the ruins she showed him by scent, and she replied affirmatively, saying she just couldn't open the door there, thinking that Minato must have opened it. He mentioned there were many magic stones there and the monsters were just as dangerous. Amy asked what color they were. He replied that they were blue. She said those stones were the most valuable of all and told him to consider it her thanks for dinner. He was surprised she wanted to thank him. Manga started asking why Amy was suddenly sniffing him, and Amy teased her in response. Manga thanked him for sharing his food with her, and Amy commented that it smelled nice here. He thought to himself that he wouldn't mention there were 240 stones. He thought he didn't know what was behind the door, but the room had an evil aura, and they were standing right in front of it. He believed his job was to attack with offensive magic, and he accepted that he couldn't mess it up. He figured the faster he finished, the faster he could go home. Meanwhile, Manga was knocking on the door with her staff. Manga explained that it could be destroyed by breaking its core and that it had a weakness to fire. Amy got ready and asked Minato if he was prepared for battle. He replied that he was always ready. Inside stood a massive golem, completely covered in stone armor. First, Amy had to distract it. The battle began and she did a great job. This strategy is effective against opponents who lack intelligence. Amy distracted it with all her might, and Minato wondered if his stones weighed tons and if everything would go well. Golems regenerate instantly. Damage can only be dealt with magic. No matter how many times Amy struck it with her sword, it kept regenerating. While Amy was distracting the enemy, Manga thanked her for buying them time. Minato was amazed by her fighting and reflexes. Manga used her magic vision to locate the core, found it, and told him to watch where she was shooting. She thought this would be a good lesson for him, as he was used to fighting monsters. She hit the target, then hit it again, and yelled for him to help. Minato, observing Manga's offensive magic, thought her magic was weak. Apparently, she just wanted to show him where to attack. He launched an improved fire bullet. A large fireball slammed into the golem. He gathered several fireballs, which startled Manga. He told her he always gives his all. He thought his current task was to replace the 10 mages they wanted to hire, and he needed to do it properly. He first had to destroy the core, so he created an improved fire bullet. He looked at Manga's expression and thought she wasn't managing, but he had destroyed it on his first try. He asked if she wanted him to cast a stronger spell and started doing so. Amy couldn't see anything because of the smoke. Golems can regenerate. A dozen hits might be enough. She said the battle would be long, but if it's destroyed, that function is useless. Manga wondered why she even bothered to define the target. He kept sending more and more, realizing he had to give it his all. The girls were tired of the explosions. Everything was exploding around them. Amy stood up and asked where the golem was, saying it had disappeared. Maina pointed to a pile of rocks and said he was there. Minato thought he had overdone it. Amy, surprised, asked if he was really a monster. Maina insisted she had told them about it. He asked if he had done his job. They looked at him with frightened eyes and he thought they wanted to change the terms. They said they would hand over the loot. He figured the quest was complete. With pleading eyes, they asked to go with him. He thought this meant they could still rely on him and that they should continue hunting, remembering the overtime from his past world. Maina explained that they could destroy it by breaking its core and that it had a weakness to fire. Amy got ready and asked Minato if he was prepared for the battle. He replied that he was always ready. Inside, a massive golem stood, completely covered in stone armor. Amy's first task was to distract it, and the battle began. She did an excellent job. This strategy is effective against opponents without intelligence. Amy distracted it with all her might, while Minato thought about how heavy its stones were and wondered if everything would go well. Golems regenerate instantly, and damage can only be dealt with magic. No matter how many times Amy struck it with her sword, it kept regenerating. While Amy was distracting the enemy, Maina thanked her for buying them time. Minato was impressed by Amy's fighting and reflexes. Maina used her magic vision to locate the core. She found it and told him to watch where she was shooting, thinking this would be a good lesson for him as he was used to fighting monsters. She hit the target, then hit it again and yelled for him to help. Minato, watching Maina's attacking magic, thought her magic was weak. Apparently, she just wanted to show him where to attack. He then launched an enhanced fire bullet. A large fireball slammed into the golem. He started gathering several fireballs, which startled Maina. He told her he always gave his all. He believed his current task was to replace the 10 mages they had planned to hire, and he needed to do it properly. First, he had to destroy the core, so he created an enhanced fire bullet. He looked at Maina's expression and thought she wasn't handling it, but he had destroyed it on his first try. He asked if she wanted him to cast an even stronger spell and began to do so. Amy couldn't see anything through the smoke. Golems can regenerate. A dozen hits might be enough. She had said the battle would be long, but if he destroyed it, that function would be useless. Maina wondered why she had bothered to pinpoint the target. He kept sending more and more, feeling he had to give his maximum effort. The girls were exhausted from the explosions. Everything around them was exploding. Amy stood up and asked where the golem was, saying it had vanished. Maina pointed to a pile of rocks and said it was right there. Minato thought he had overdone it. Amy, surprised, asked if he was really a monster, and Maina insisted she had told him about it. He asked if he had done his job. They looked at him with frightened eyes, and he thought they wanted to change the terms. They said they would hand over the loot. He figured the quest was complete. With pleading eyes, they asked to go with him. He thought this meant they could still rely on him and that he should continue hunting, remembering the overtime from his previous world. Amy's clear voice echoed through the massive 3-story building as she searched for treasures and called out their locations. Minato listened to her but couldn't figure out where the treasures were hidden. He checked wall cabinets and stones, finding nothing until he suddenly caught a faint scent. Delighted, he thought he had also started to sense the treasures and looked in the direction the aroma was coming from. But the source of the smell turned out to be Maina, who had already started a fire and was cooking. She announced that lunch was ready. Minato compared her to a grandmother from a fairy tale, and Amy happily came downstairs. The heroes placed boxes next to each other to use as seats and tables. Maina poured the hot broth, and Amy and Minato immediately grabbed their bowls. Before them was broth with meat and buns. In his previous life, Minato couldn't afford such a meal and ate supermarket food, so he decided to thank the girls. After tasting the food, he was amazed by the flavor of the meat. Even a slight gamey smell didn't stop him from enjoying the dish, after which Maina said it was the meat of frogs he had caught. Minato wasn't bothered by this, as the meat turned out to be edible and delicious. After lunch, the heroes continued to explore the depths of the ruins. The ruins resembled a labyrinth, but Amy confidently led the party by scent. Minato cleared the path of monsters, sparing smaller creatures, while Maina left markers and repelled attacks with her magic vision. By dividing their duties, Minato, Maina, and Amy gradually became a true team of adventurers. Soon, Maina asked Minato to protect Amy so she could calmly explore the ruins. With his strength against monsters, the exploration should go much faster. Minato noted Mina's excellent vision to himself. She quickly found enemies' weak points and suggested their vulnerability to different attributes. Embarrassed by the praise, Mina countered that everything was possible thanks to Minato, as he could use any attribute. The girl's reaction amused him. Minato was grateful for her help, as without Mina's abilities, he would have a harder time with the monsters. He noted their weakness to lightning and was pleased with the team, after which Mina asked about the next plan. Further exploration depended on Amy and her instincts. Minato expected her to think, but the girl was completely focused on eating. The heroes decided to explore the ruins a bit more and leave the rest for the next day. They wanted to take out as many valuables as possible, while Minato was surprised that Amy only cared about food. Finishing her broth, she placed the empty plate on a chair and, lost in thought, fidgeted in her seat. The guy watching the girl also noticed that she had managed to eat the entire pot. But prolonged contemplation only gave the girl a headache. Mina was shocked that the girl had actually thought so much, while Minato himself wondered if Amy thought at all or if she acted completely without thinking. But returning to reality, Amy confidently declared that they needed to move out, pointing with her finger to their next area of exploration. She warned that a rather strong opponent might be encountered along the way. The guys asked the girl if he was as strong as a golem, to which she replied that she didn't know, puzzling Minato. Even if she didn't know the strength of the upcoming enemy, she could smell the treasure awaiting them. She noted that the enemy might be strong, which even scared her. A strong opponent, after which valuable treasure awaited the travelers. Mina pondered Amy's words. Mina asked if Minato could still fight. He replied that he could manage if the enemy wasn't stronger than a golem, but Amy immediately asked if he had used all his mana in previous fights. Mina explained that Minato's mana level had only decreased slightly. Amy was surprised, and the young man himself realized that Mina could see his mana in real time, so he couldn't hide it from her. Taking her staff, Mina confidently placed it in front of her and explained that the job of adventurers was to find rare treasures. However, if there was serious danger, they should retreat immediately. The heroes confirmed the conditions, and Minato took out his notebook and made a mark of agreement. He smiled and accepted the rules. Amy immediately headed towards the unexplored part of the ruins, while Mina packed up the cauldron and put it into a magic portal. Squeezing through a narrow passage, Amy reached for a sphere and tried to put it into her storage, but it slipped out of the portal. The sphere flew out the window and down to where Minato was. Amy managed to grab it, and the young man noticed her. Amy asked if Minato had space in his spatial storage, as her own was already full. He agreed, and the girl threw him the sphere. Minato barely managed to catch the sphere, after which Amy began to pass him other finds. The young man opened a portal above him so that the items would fall directly inside, and he noticed magical spheres, precious stones, and magical artifacts among them. Among the pile of magical items found was an old walkie-talkie, which he immediately recognized from his past life. Mina, appearing behind the young man, explained that it was a magical transmitter. It was an advanced device that ancient people used for long-distance communication. Minato noted to himself that although he hadn't used a walkie-talkie in his past life, the device's operating principle was surprisingly similar to phones. Mina noted the item's value and rarity, while the young man noticed her resemblance to a secretary who relays information. He asked her how expensive this item was. Mina smiled slyly and quoted a price of 20 million zigs per piece, which effectively meant 20 million yen. Minato realized that if the heroes returned home safely, they could sell the found magical transmitter for that amount and live comfortably, and she added that Minato would receive exactly half of the buyout sum. Inspecting the found items, the young man noticed something similar to the transmitter, but it was without antennas. He immediately remembered seeing something similar before. When he first arrived in this world, a circular object similar to it taught him offensive magic for survival. The magic information terminal could display maps and search for information. It also had a voice assistant and was much more efficient compared to the transmitter. Minato was curious about its value. He proudly told Mina that the item he found was much better than the transmitter they had found earlier and asked about its price. The girl was surprised by the discovery. Taking the item in her hands, the girl noted that it was still useless, and the guy didn't know how to respond to such a direct statement. She called out to Amy, who immediately ran over to the guy and the girl. Minato, however, was curious why she disliked the magic terminal so much. Maina asked Amy not to pick up such useless things. Amy understood her companion and with a smile said goodbye to the junk, tossing it aside. She returned to her tasks, adding that she would be more careful with the items she found. Minato was shocked by the scene and used magic to catch the falling magic terminal. After successfully grabbing the item, he held it in his hands. Maina reminded him that it was useless and sighed, but the guy asked her to let him try something. He opened the terminal, which looked like a feature phone. Pressing the start button, the terminal didn't react at all. The girl gave him an awkward look as if trying to soften his obvious failure. But Minato disagreed internally. He was sure the terminal wasn't broken at all, it just ran on mana, which he didn't have at the moment. He immediately realized that charging it would require some kind of adapter and an infusion of energy. Maina tilted her head slightly and asked what exactly he meant, and the guy, in turn, was surprised by her ignorance, as it was entirely possible to transfer mana to objects. Even an expert in ruin exploration didn't know this, and the knowledge gap was simply enormous. He had to figure it out himself and not rely on others. Meanwhile, Amy finished her investigation and returned to her companions. Minato was confident that since he had found the magic information terminal, a suitable adapter for it must be somewhere nearby. She told them that they needed to return as soon as possible, which immediately caught Minato and Mina's attention. They ran after the girl, asking what had happened and if it was monsters, but Amy couldn't give a precise answer. Minato called out to Maina, asking her to use her magic vision and tell them that they needed to head into the right tunnel. But then a door closed in front of them. With a loud bang, the door slammed shut. Amy, unable to slow down, crashed into the iron. Maina also crashed into it right after her. Minato, stepping away from the girls, began to look around. Amy also noticed something was wrong, while Maina held her face in pain. The heroes were trapped. The back exit, like the others, slammed shut with a bang. This might not only be happening in the room they were in, but it could possibly affect all the doors in the ruins. The sound of the closing doors echoed with a powerful rumble, shaking the ground and making it hard for the guy and the girls to stay on their feet. Amy, banging her hands on the iron gate, asked the guy to destroy the doors with his magic. The guy, drawing a magic circle in his notebook, extended his hand forward, causing a fireball to appear. He stood facing the door, channeling his power directly towards it. Amy stood to the side to keep herself safe. A small puff of smoke rose from the impact. However, the attack was unsuccessful. Minato surmised that the doors were made of magic-resistant material. If he continued, he might be able to destroy these gates, but there would be other gates ahead that they would also have to destroy. He started thinking about their rescue plan and asked Maina if she had one. But the girl was unconscious. Minato and Amy immediately rushed to the fallen girl, trying to help her. The young man suggested that Maina might have lost consciousness from seeing an unusual source of mana, while Amy tried to bring their companion back to her senses. The girl immediately opened her eyes. Getting up, she told Minato to be ready to defend himself. Without delay, he stood up and erected a defensive barrier in front of himself and the girls, which immediately deflected a powerful blow. They were surrounded by walls that couldn't withstand the destructive power from which the heroes had managed to protect themselves. Even though they were surrounded by ruins, a further path opened up for them to proceed. Minato asked if the girls were okay, to which Amy, covering her mouth from the dust, replied that she was fine. He was curious about where they had been attacked from. From a pile of stones, Amy noticed a metallic object with sharp blades around it. It turned out to be a machine, engulfed in some kind of energy, extending its limbs. Their upcoming opponent, a metallic dragon, was 3 times larger than the travelers. Its gaze was fixed on them and fire blazed from its metallic maw. Minato recalled the conditions that had been stated earlier. If they encountered a serious problem, they should run. The metallic dragon began to roar. However, they would hardly be able to simply escape an opponent of this level, and they were also trapped within these ruins. Amy grabbed Minato's hand in fear, while Maina tightly held her staff, muttering that they were doomed. The metallic opponent aimed its huge and heavy tail towards the team. The young man immediately noticed this and pushed the girls away from him, taking the incoming blow. The dragon knocked the guy down. Minato suddenly fell and the bewildered girls watched him, unable to help. With a crash, he hit the ground, which was now covered in his blood. The dragon continued its fierce attack and threw the young man's wounded body against the wall. The girls cried out his name in despair. Falling to the ground again, Minato remembered how he had been hit by a magical machine in his past life. A bloody cough escaped his lips. But gathering all his strength, he carefully got up. Thanks to the tragedy from his past life, he could think clearly in a shocking situation. Placing his hand on his abdomen, he decided to first enhance his magic. Minato stood on his feet before the enormous opponent and realized that it was focused on him. From numerous injuries and blows, the young man's condition and appearance were terrifying. His face was smeared with blood, as were his fingers. He opened a series of magic circles to escape the dragon in time. He aimed these magic circles at the dragon, attacking it with them. Fire bullets emerging from the circles stunned the metal dragon. The guy was sure that for now, this would be enough to distract the enemy. However, the dragon didn't even flinch from the numerous hits. Minato's attacks didn't leave a single mark on the monster's metallic shell. The metal dragon turned out to be much stronger than the golem. He was about to attack the monster again, but from the other side, Meina attacked the dragon. Amy stood behind Meina, who held a staff she used to launch an attack at the monster. Minato was surprised that the girls hadn't run away but stayed with him, assuming that adventurers might not care about their lives. The metal dragon had sensors capable of detecting the heroes even through walls. The guy noted that the monster managed to deflect his projectile, which had previously been able to destroy any monster. Destroying the ruins' walls was impossible, which only worsened their situation. The only way out was to defeat the dragon. Otherwise, they would face death at the metallic claws of the beast. Amy declared that she would figure out how to defeat the monster. In one hand, she held an ordinary-looking orb, and with the other, she held an unfamiliar weapon at her waist, which puzzled the young man. The girl noted that these items were quite expensive. Using the weapon on her waist, the girl managed to fly towards the monster, still holding the orb in her hand. The guy watched her, noting that the weapon she found looked interesting. She circled above the dragon, making it divert its attention from the young man and focus on the flying girl. Meina noticed the guy's condition and asked how he was feeling. He replied that everything was fine. After drinking an elixir, he asked Amy how she was attacking the dragon with the glowing orb in her hand. Amy, looking down at the guy, stated that everything was great and continued to deal with the dragon. Meina explained that it was a common magic weapon for provocation, and it emitted a light that demons couldn't resist. Minato was surprised at how simple it all was. Amy called out to the guy. She assured him that she would do everything possible to anger the dragon as much as she could, promising to do it in the blink of an eye. But the guy wasn't reassured. He only became more puzzled by the girl's words, not understanding their meaning. After all, Amy couldn't have failed to notice how even Minato's enhanced magic hadn't worked on the dragon. He had no idea which of his spells could work. Meanwhile, the girl continued to playfully tease the dragon. However, an idea came to him. He had come up with this spell just last night and had specifically sealed it for safety. Minato realized that they would find themselves in a difficult situation if he used the sealed magic. At this time, Meina, standing behind him, watched Amy and grew worried. The dragon, irritated by the girl's daring shouts, unleashed a huge fireball in her direction. The explosion was massive, from which the girl flew out and continued to circle the dragon while it attacked her in response. The metallic beast couldn't keep up with the girl. Meina clutched the young man's cloak and called his name. She decided to express her admiration for him, as he had managed to move in such a difficult situation while she herself was in a state of complete stupor. He did this using the magic with which he had killed the golem, and the girl asked him to do the same to the mechanical dragon. However, the guy noted in his thoughts that the current situation was vastly different from before. He also asked the girl to find the dragon's weak spots using her magic vision. But the girl, stumbling over her words from excitement, replied that the machine was too strong, yet couldn't finish her sentence. Amy, still distracting the monster, yelled at Minato, pleading for help, while Meina tried to finish her words. The guy, for his part, noted that the girls were using their powers unwisely and seemed to be escaping reality. Smiling nervously, he was already mentally preparing to say goodbye to his second life. The dragon continued to attack the girl while she begged for his help. Minato, however, understood that he was powerless against such a monster. He decided to use another spell from his notebook, realizing that the fire projectiles weren't harming the monster. However, if this didn't work either, he considered it his last fight. He raised his hand, and glowing magic circles began to spread open above him. But Minato decided to take a risk, as waiting would only mean certain death. The magic circles moved towards the dragon, which was preoccupied with Amy. From each magic circle, a fireball formed. The fireballs exploded all over the mechanical beast's body, catching it off guard. Meina watched in astonishment as Minato unleashed a massive, all-around attack on the enemy. The explosions continued. But even under the continuous barrage, the mechanical dragon survived, and thick smoke erupted from its mouth. When the explosion subsided, the beast shook itself, spread its enormous wings, and stirred up clouds of smoke. Meina stared in horror at the surviving monster and covered her mouth, unable to believe that even that hadn't worked, tears welling up in her eyes. But Minato explained that his attack wasn't aimed at destruction, but at finding a weak spot, which turned out to be in the magical conduit on its neck, which was bending and twisting. Noticing a crack in this conduit, the young man immediately attacked it with a lightning beam. The only counter to such magic was lightning magic, and to break its defense, strikes of this element were best suited. Minato saw that his tactic was yielding results. He hit the crack in the conduit around its neck directly. However, the dragon fixed an incinerating gaze on the heroes below, remaining almost unharmed after the attacks. The monster and Minato stared at each other in silence. The guy realized that ordinary enhanced magic wouldn't be enough to remove the metal from the dragon. Minato reached for his notebook, intending to use another magic as they had no other choice. In his thoughts, he only hoped that luck would be on their side this time. The dragon was already preparing to deliver a devastating blow. However, this attack was aimed at Amy, who was standing on a pillar. She jumped away from the attack, surprised by the suddenness. Minato also noticed the dragon's choice as he posed a greater threat to the monster than the girl. Amy kept dodging the attacks, holding the orb in her hands. The provocation from this magical item turned out to be stronger than the guy had anticipated. A shattered pillar crashed down right on the heroes, but Meina managed to protect herself and Minato with a barrier. The young man thanked the girl who, gripping her staff, maintained the defense and pushed the pile of rocks aside. He wondered if this was a special form of defensive magic unique to their world. The battle had already partially destroyed the building, and amidst the debris, Minato lost sight of the mechanical dragon. He let out a loud, heavy sigh. Slapping his cheeks, he tried to snap back to reality. He had thought he wouldn't be able to handle it and would die immediately, but things were turning out differently. He couldn't afford to make a self-sacrificing move. He had forgotten the best way to act in such a situation. He needed to trust people. He called out to Meina and smiled at her, which startled her. He told her there was a type of magic they could use to defeat the mechanical dragon. Meina looked at him suspiciously, noting that his face had changed as if he was plotting something. Still smiling, he asked for her help, but the girl was unsure about his plan. Minato, to himself, noted that he was trying to keep his smile serious and businesslike. But deciding not to argue with Meina, he quickly called out to Amy, immediately puzzling the girl next to him, who didn't understand what all this talk was about. The girl, who was still dodging attacks, turned her attention to the guy who had called her. The magic in her tool was already running out. He yelled to her that the dragon didn't like her very much and asked her to get as high as possible. Once she did, he told her to throw the ball on his signal and return to the others at full speed. Meina tried to stop the guy, asking what he was going to do, but instead of explaining, he decided to show her. A magic circle opened above his palm, from which a small sphere emerged. Soon, this sphere surrounded the guy and the girl, forming a protective barrier. The girl, touching the barrier, was surprised by Minato's defensive magic and admitted she had never seen such a spell before. She wanted to continue speaking, but the guy interrupted her and handed her this spell, saying she would be responsible for the team's safety. He directed the magic circle with the spell onto her staff. The staff began to absorb the magical power of the defensive barrier, which greatly frightened the girl, but the guy just asked her to bear with it and not worry. He noted that the girl was using a not very effective defensive magic and decided that if he used the magic himself, its cost would decrease and its power would increase. He directed his hand towards a new magic circle drawn on a notepad page. Deciding to use magic right inside the walls that were repelling it, he tried to release excess energy, while also casting a protective spell on Meina so she wouldn't get hurt. But he was honest with himself that this would take more time and they didn't have it in their current situation. Amy shouted that the dragon was trying to grab her with its metal claws. Minato was surprised that she had managed to get high enough for it to continue hunting her. He shouted the signal to the girl. The girl, screaming and with tears in her eyes, hurled the magic orb and told the dragon to grab it, while Minato drew a magic circle above himself. He conjured a circle large enough to completely contain the dragon while it was distracted. Black sparks shot out from the circle, gradually engulfing the surrounding space. Minato had managed to conjure truly insane magic. To infuse the circle with the right magic at the perfect moment, the young man had to simplify the process as much as possible. His stats had dropped significantly, not even accounting for his mana consumption, and his magic consumption was only 8% of his total power. Amy managed to fly over to her comrades. Distracted from the sphere, the dragon turned its gaze towards the heroes under the protective barrier. Minato realized he was using his magic too quickly and needed to do something about it. The dragon directed its fiery attack at the spherical magic from which black sparks were emanating. It had pinpointed the target's location. The magic circle began to expand, taking up almost half of the building's space. A black glow enveloped everything, and the dragon found itself directly above the growing sphere. Suddenly, a blinding light pierced through the building. The mechanical dragon couldn't withstand the pressure of such power, and black sparks enveloped its body. Minato smiled, pleased that he had finally managed to defeat such a powerful opponent, and continued to keep his hands on the magic circle. The sphere absorbed the monster, and the dragon, shuddering, soared upwards, breaking free from the ruins. In the sky, its body finally shattered and broke apart under the onslaught of the magic. Its remnants rained down like iron, while the heroes stood under the protective barrier, watching the pile of metal fall in silent astonishment. Amy informed the young man that the dragon was falling directly on them. He told Maina to change the protective magic as quickly as possible. But without wasting time, he decided to change the protective magic himself, seeing that the girl was in a daze. The enormous head of the mechanical dragon crashed directly onto their protective barrier. Once he was sure it was all over, he dropped the barrier and calmly rejoiced in their victory. Amy called out to Minato in annoyance while Maina lay unconscious. But as soon as they took a step forward, the ground beneath them cracked and they all fell down. Landing rather uncomfortably, the young man noticed the weight on his back where the girls were lying. Looking around, he realized there were even more floors below them, which meant they couldn't escape. Maina, waking up, exclaimed, asking what kind of magic the young man had used. Minato, reassured that everyone was fine, calmed down. The young man replied that he had only come up with this magic yesterday and was sure it was the first magic he had ever used, which piqued the girl's interest. Sighing, he decided that after such a tough day, they needed to go home, but Amy smelled something delicious. Turning to her, the young man asked her to stop, but the girl had already gone around the corner and called the others over. She reported that there was something big here. The guy approached the girl. They found themselves in front of a huge, empty container marked with the number 13 and the inscription Deus Ex Machina, with numerous cables attached to the top. Minato, reading the inscription on the strange capsule with confusion, couldn't help but ask aloud what it meant. At that moment, the equipment came to life, and information written in a foreign language flashed on the monitor screen. Returning to the city after a long day, the heroes settled into a small room on the 3rd floor, designated for Mania Guild meetings, where they were to discuss all their findings. The tired travelers slumped onto the table, and Amy, with a sad sigh, admitted she was sorry to part with the mechanical dragon and wished she could take it with her. Minato suddenly remembered the strange find in the ruins, strikingly similar to the artificial magical intelligence that once ran rampant in his past life and left a deep impression on his memory. Maina doubted whether Amy could have independently taken the pile of metal from the dragon, as it was enormous in size and there would be nowhere to store the found materials. The girl sighed, agreeing with her observation. Minato continued to ponder the Deus Ex machine, which is created by combining 13 magical arithmetic units. It was believed that during the escape, all but 12 of the machines disappeared without a trace, but presumably they came to this world. Maina sharply slammed her fist on the table and irritably declared that she was tired of these paltry sums and that it was time to do something truly worthwhile. The young man concluded that one way or another they had run out of magic and energy. After learning that the machine was broken, they managed to retrieve the treasures from that room and return to the guild. The heroes collectively sighed after a tough day, relieved that they had at least survived such an ordeal. A satisfied smile appeared on Amy's face, and she decided not to hide from her comrades what she had managed to obtain through hard work. They had collected 36 magical communicators worth 720 million zigs. Minato noticed how the girl's expression changed, her face coloring with a greedy smirk that promised new plans and perhaps new adventures. Amy's good intuition turned out to be magical transmitters and other equipment which were abundant in that room with the dragon. Amy herself was delighted that she had managed to acquire these devices. She hadn't expected the redemption amount to exceed her expectations, jumping with joy around the room as she could now afford the best meat in the city. The guy was even pleased by such sudden energy in her voice, and Maina herself, with keen interest, asked him what kind of meat he would like to try for dinner. But Maina, closing her eyes, declared that they wouldn't be able to cash out the money they had received. Amy, hearing the conversation, stopped with a puzzled look and stared at her friend. Then Maina, holding up one of the transmitters, explained that this find would be enough for years of production in the country. She added that cashing out such a huge sum all at once at the guild would be extremely difficult. Amy, disappointed, only regretted that because of this, she wouldn't be able to try the best meat. Distributing several communicators to each team member, Maina said that they should divide these items among themselves and, in return, immediately sell other items to the guild. Minato was relieved that they had collected 36 transmitters, making them easier to distribute. The girls each received 9, and the guy got 18. To lighten the mood, Amy decided to play a prank and suddenly appeared behind her friend, trying to scare her. Maina, startled, didn't appreciate the joke and sharply asked her not to do that, as she was near crystals that could explode with the slightest mistake. Storing such a dangerous item personally was strictly forbidden, and therefore it had to be immediately sold to the guild. Amy, in her carefree manner, suggested simply not letting the magical power flow, to which Maina sharply retorted that she would never allow such foolishness. Minato noted that a similar crystal existed in his past life, but working with it required a dangerous goods transport license. A loud explosion was heard outside the window, from which dark smoke began to billow and birds flew away from the danger. Minato turned his head towards the window to figure out what had happened. Amy had already hidden under the table, explaining that she was scared. The guy and Maina moved closer to the window to check out the situation outside. He noted that the sound of the explosion came from the ruins, and the girl added that it was much further away, deep in the forest. They noticed a new noise starting up after the explosion. Guild members were running towards the exit. Maina sighed and said they were too tired to deal with another new problem. They needed to regain their strength, otherwise their help would be useless. So all they could do now was fill out a buy-sell request, then eat and sleep. The others agreed with the girl's opinion, and Minato himself noted that he didn't want to get into trouble today. After filling out the request, Maina proudly handed it to Minato for his signature. The guy took on the role of person responsible for the sale and also agreed to be the accompanying person, but he asked for clarification on what the term main contributor meant. The girl quickly explained that this was precisely why they could receive rewards from the guild and the country for great achievements. The guy, however, thought that he could only do that if he became a great adventurer, and he noted that it was strange to be a major contributor when using a lot of magic. The girls couldn't help but burst out laughing, teasing him with words and quoting his own expressions. Amy smiled and remarked that Minato really was one of those people who sparked genuine interest. Hearing this, the guy himself tried to clarify which category they had placed him in. Maina said they wouldn't lie on the application. Amy continued that it was because Minato was the biggest contributor, and the girls were the only ones who joined him afterward. Maina added that it was all because Minato used a little magic and winked at him, asking him to be content with that. But the young man stood silently, processing all the information. He realized it was some kind of special bonus and noted that the girls had joined his company with particular caution. Maina was already getting ready to sell the items. But before the trio could leave the room, their attention was drawn to an approaching sound, slowly getting closer down the corridor. An adult man with a small head wound entered the room, demanding to see the sage. Maina recognized the man, calling him Rice. She asked him what happened, while Minato simultaneously asked Amy who that person was. Amy replied that Mr. Rice was the head of the Mania Guild, and the guy noted that he had just met the boss. Rice announced that they had an emergency and urgently needed their help. He promised to explain all the details on the way, asking the team to follow him. Minato understood that the matter was serious if the guild leader himself had come to them. The guy asked the man if it was related to the recent explosion. Mr. Rice's face only darkened in response, which the guy immediately noticed. The man asked the young man his rank and profession. Minato introduced himself as an E-rank mage. But Rice grimaced and sighed. He told the guy that he could stay in the room and if they needed help, he would let him know. Mina tried to defend Minato and his abilities, but Rice didn't let her finish, saying that in such a situation, the girl's own strength would be enough. However, the guy wasn't upset. On the contrary, he was happy that he would be able to rest. He mentally apologized to the girls, noting that it looked like he was leaving them both unattended, but if they had special abilities or knowledge, they could use them. Nodding to himself in conclusion, he noted that he was a beginner, his rank wasn't high enough, and he had almost no energy left. Amy got seriously angry and shouted loudly, demanding that Mr. Rice not dare underestimate Minato. Her anger was so sharp that the man himself cried out in unexpected fright. She started praising the young man and listing his achievements during their work together, saying that he had defeated many golems and a mechanical dragon with amazing magic. As she was about to continue her praise, Minato covered her mouth to stop her and told the leader he would wait for instructions in the room. The scene was awkward. Mina asked the guy if he wanted everything that happened to remain a secret between them, to which he nodded. After letting Amy go, Minato admitted to himself that he didn't want to stand out from the crowd. But Mina, turning to the leader, asked him if Minato could accompany the girls, otherwise they would refuse to follow Rice. Minato, who had been planning to rest, did not expect such a request from his companion. However, he had to go with the team, not particularly happy with the outcome. He yawned, remembering he hadn't slept for 2 days straight. The leader, having recovered a bit, inquired about the girls' ranks and was surprised to learn that both of them were B rank. Minato, hearing this, respectfully noted that his companions were true veterans of the adventurer's life. Going downstairs, they stood on the balcony and noticed how the other guild members, agreeing on something, exclaimed loudly and decisively, not hiding their confidence. The dark-haired young man noted that this scene was indeed breathtaking. They noticed changes in each other's bodies, that someone had bulked up and someone else was here to earn money. They were ready to fight 10 or even 20 monsters and confidently declared that they would destroy them with ease. Descending to the men, Rice announced that a detailed report from the reconnaissance group should arrive soon and asked everyone to wait inside the building. Mania was a city with many new adventurers. But even so, everyone gathered here was from the elite. You could tell just by looking at their physiques. The girls and the guy were smaller than their tall and large colleagues. They noticed Mania, addressing her as a seeker of wisdom. The girl asked them what had happened. One of them replied that a huge number of monsters were heading towards the city, and apparently these monsters were high-ranked, which is why veterans had been summoned here. The adventurers began to split into groups to combine their efforts and show the monsters their full power. The veterans were developing a plan and invited the girls to join them, as their help would also be beneficial. Amy, meanwhile, spotted an acquaintance in the crowd and ran over to greet her. Mina found Minato standing by the wall. He decided not to participate in any of it, continuing to yawn widely, but suddenly someone slammed on the door. A man entered the building, trying to catch his breath after a long run. Raising his gaze, he showed his colleagues a magic transmitter and announced that a detailed report from the scouts had arrived. The Reconnaissance Corps reported that the approximate number of monsters was 6,000, with an average rank around C. The veteran adventurers were shocked by such news, hearing the monsters' power level. They thought the scouts might have mixed something up, but the man with the transmitter in his hand stated that the information was reliable. He added that the city's outer walls would not withstand the approaching monsters. A crowd of enormous monsters, even taller than the trees themselves, was heading towards Mania. Among them were dragon-type monsters like pterodactyls, mutated animals, elephants and bulls with long horns, as well as a huge deer with a large eye on its forehead. But there were also fiends from hell themselves, like enormous trolls from whose mouths smoke billowed. Hearing that such powerful monsters were approaching them, they decided to run and save themselves. Minato was surprised by their reaction. The adventurers shouted out the number of monsters awaiting them but hesitated to confront them face to face. To win, more people were needed to defeat even one. They threw the doors wide open, but someone stood in front of them. It was guild leader Rice with other adventurers behind him. He stopped the fleeing fighters and suggested they first discuss a plan to defend the city. The adventurers, hearing his calm suggestion, were surprised and hastily stated that they needed to evacuate as soon as possible, as the situation was becoming too dangerous. Rice, remaining calm but still worried about the current situation, explained that the monsters would only arrive at the city tomorrow morning at dawn. One of the adventurers then shouted that they only had 6 hours left to prepare. The man continued, saying that while the monsters weren't active, experienced travelers could escape. But he reminded them about the ordinary city residents and novice adventurers whose safety should be paramount. The situation was dire as they had no means of survival. The experienced adventurers exchanged glances, then looked away, avoiding the direct gazes of the common folk as if hiding their inner doubts. He expressed his understanding that they were terrified and reminded them of their first rule: adventurers save themselves first. Nevertheless, he added that he wanted to share his request as the branch leader of the Mania Guild. He and the adventurers behind him bowed before the large number of travelers, asking them to protect both the city and its people. The travelers showed no resolve. They merely exchanged awkward glances while Rice assured them that a reward awaited them and urged them to make the most of the situation. One of the adventurers agreed with guild leader Rice's words. Minato observed all of this from the sidelines. He mentally noted the leader's strengths. His negotiation skills weren't about escaping difficulties, but about courtesy, foresight, and the ability to formulate a clear plan of action in advance. He wondered what he should do. The men inquired about the next steps, and Rice told Sierra to get the map. The blonde girl complied, unrolling a large sheet on the table. The primary task was to build a second line of defense and a trench behind the outer wall, where all city residents, including adventurers, would be sheltered. To get the materials for this, the adventurers would need to cut down trees and dismantle several houses. The sand remaining after preparing the trenches would be used as an embankment between the walls. The girl advised them to make them as high as possible, and noted that the areas were divided into groups around the guild and a special training center, which was enclosed by walls on all sides. The difficulty was that the slightest noise would alert the monsters, causing them to attack. Therefore, they needed to quickly build the wall and take cover, allowing the hordes to pass by until reinforcements arrived. She continued to explain that they would create enough space around the guild for ordinary people to enter. Murmuring voices rose from the crowd. Some doubted whether to start right now, others noted the city's size and the difficulty of evacuation, claiming that the wall wouldn't withstand the onslaught of 6,000 C-rank monsters. Meanwhile, Minato noticed how the adventurers stood still, doing nothing. Maina, unable to bear it, asked a counter-question. Would they manage to accomplish their plan in such a short time frame? Minato noted that her words reflected the general concern. One of the adventurers, looking at the girl, remembered his granddaughter, whom she resembled so much, and he even had a fleeting thought of treating her to something sweet. Rice decided to be honest with the fighters and admitted that the probability of success was quite low, but stated that they had no other plan. The dark-haired adventurer remarked that the branch leader was indeed capable of developing and implementing a plan even within such limited time. In Rice's opinion, this plan seemed to be the only viable option. And without losing a minute, the man announced the start of the operation. Residents living near the outer wall were ordered to move and prepare the area, while adventurers and carpenters were to begin digging the trench and erecting fortifications. In other words, the heroes needed to do everything within their power. Inside the walls, work was in full swing. Adventurers joined forces, chopping down and carrying trees to build defenses against the monsters. An old man in the crowd was assigning tasks to the men, while the leader spoke with the female adventurers inside. Suddenly, someone announced they were leaving. His colleagues tried to talk him out of it, thinking his decision was too reckless. But he confessed that A-rank monsters were approaching and stated directly that they wouldn't be able to handle them. Mounting his horse, he galloped away, advising the others to do the same. The guys were surprised by his cowardice, and Minato noticed that people were slowly but surely starting to fall into despair and lose hope. Suddenly, a man with a cart almost ran into him, rushing to move his belongings. It was only then that Minato realized how many people had gathered in the city. Among the residents were elderly people and women with babies. At that moment, the innkeeper distracted him, worriedly noting that they had serious problems brewing. Seeing the young man's sleepy state, the innkeeper gently laid him down in the hay to rest and offered him a piece of well-cooked meat to regain his strength. Minato, who hadn't slept since yesterday, asked how much he owed, but the innkeeper refused payment, explaining that the food would spoil during evacuation anyway, and admitted that, being crippled, he couldn't help build but would contribute as much as he could. He didn't forget to give the young man a blanket so he could get some proper rest, and then turned to offer food to the adventurers so they could regain their strength. Minato, lying down, looked at the piece of meat and apologized to Amy. Taking a bite, he savored the taste of the well-cooked meat. He lay in the warmth on soft hay with a blanket, and despite the situation, he felt safe. Lying on the hay, he watched the adventurers working intensely. The residents were already behind the fences and had set up tents. Sierra was helping newcomers settle in, gathering them at a central meeting point, while others offered their healing magic in case anyone felt unwell. Minato wondered if he could offer a helping hand in some way. After eating the meat, he looked at the bare bone, holding it up. His magical power had decreased by 20%. He could only cast 100 nameless magic shots, and his knowledge from his past life wasn't enough to use it more effectively. He watched the children engrossed in their game and thought, if only he were as fond of strategy as they were, perhaps he could come up with a clever plan. But from his past, he only remembered children's games. Hide-and-seek, tag, magic circle games, card games, and kinmanhwa, which was once very popular. The children were drawing some scribbles in the sand, enjoying the process. Kinmanhwa was a game for learning magic circles in an entertaining way and was a battle for positions. On each of the 10 cards, a player had to draw a circle they remembered by heart. After setting the circle, they would flip it, and the compatibility of attributes determined who won and advanced. Minato noted that for some reason, even the Ministry of Education recommended it, and they often played it in elementary school. There was also a magic circle for repelling, which was used when an enemy was in the camp. But before that, the circle could prevent enemy forces from entering. Recalling the shape of the circle, he drew it in his notebook and something clicked for him. He remembered that as a child, he didn't understand the true meaning of this phenomenon. Now, as he improved his magic in the new world, he finally understood. It seemed to him that the shape resembled the magic circle inside Amy's sphere, which attracted demons, and he realized that the circle also repelled. Minato wasn't sure if this magic would work, but holding his notebook confidently, he decided it was worth a shot. Minato crouched down and used his enhancement magic. His body sprang upward, and he swiftly moved to the highest tower. Archers checking the situation outside the walls reported that the monster invasion had stopped, which they initially found hard to believe. Usually, if demons spot people, they immediately attack, especially if they gather in a pack to assault the city. But for some reason, the monsters had stopped. The mutated wolves near the huge troll had stopped, but continued to growl. Aiming their arrows, the archers noticed the demons starting to move, hoping they would just pass by. A short-haired girl opened the window, checked the northern side, and covered her mouth with her hands, shocked by what she saw. People loudly shouted their persistent questions at her, demanding a clear answer, fearing that demons had already infiltrated the city. They also anxiously asked what had happened to the yellow torches that were supposed to signal an invasion. But the girl, not understanding what was happening, couldn't explain anything. A small old man sarcastically inquired about the girl's answer, suggesting her communicator was malfunctioning, but she immediately dismissed his speculation. She stated that the invasion had stopped, but the monsters were still approaching them. With the first rays of dawn, just as predicted, grim hordes of monsters surrounded the city walls from all sides. There were an incredible number of them, and the sight terrified everyone looking down from the fortress towers. Anxiety once again gripped the city streets, and the residents couldn't hide their fear. They were astonished that the monsters were capable of strategizing and conducting a real siege, like trained warriors. Minato was confident that his demon-repelling magic was working. However, seeing the bewildered people who didn't know what to do next or where to go made the young man himself feel anxious. He suddenly wondered if he might have made a serious mistake in his actions. Suddenly, his train of thought was interrupted when a familiar female voice, confident and firm, as if accusing, was heard from behind. The voice made it clear that the responsibility for everything happening lay squarely with him. Amy and Maina, unable to hold back their tears, tightly hugged their comrade from behind. Their unexpected appearance and such a touching display of affection made Minato freeze in astonishment. But he admitted he was glad to be reunited with them. He asked Maina, who had previously voiced her guess that she knew what he was doing. The girl replied that she was referring to the invasion stopping for some reason. Maina could see his magic, and she immediately pointed out the defense. The girls, huddled together, started showering him with questions about whether this magic really repelled demons, noting that if they had such magic, they could have walked the path peacefully. But the young man assured them that there was no need for this magic. He had heard that it was useless if one got too close to demons, and it was also difficult to transfer after activation. Minato noted in his thoughts that he only knew all these nuances thanks to the game. Turning to the bustling crowd, he speculated that he had used it correctly, given how stressed people were about the monster's behavior. But the girls began to praise his technique and said it was good that he decided to do it that way. Manga explained that the double layer of the wall was completed, but not its upper part, and they had to fight flying monsters. Their horde included giants and orcs. There was also a possibility that they could climb over the double wall. As it turned out, Amy and Manga had been discussing countermeasures against a wall breach with Commander Rice. Minato wondered if this process was truly so expensive and costly, but he didn't dare to ask the girls directly. He only thought to himself that the costs were surely enormous, and his guess seemed quite reasonable. The girls looked up at the magic repelling the monsters and were relieved that Minato was with them. They smiled at him warmly, not holding back their emotions. Manga asked where he got such a technique, as she had never heard of it before, despite having read many magic books. The young man briefly replied that it was a technique from Kinminyu. The girls tilted their heads, not quite understanding what Minato was talking about. A Guide to Countering Emergency Magical Catastrophes was the game's original title, but it was later shortened to Kinminyu. Minato was glad he could recall the game's long, original title. In his previous life, demons were almost wiped out, so he rarely had to fight them. But if, by some unlikely chance, a demon attack did occur, citizens forbidden from using offensive magic would be defenseless against the monsters. It was in such a situation that the state decided to teach basic measures, presenting them in the form of a game. Ultimately, the long title was shortened, and now it's known as it is. Minato admitted that explaining it in words was extremely difficult, but that's how all the information he found in the old book was presented. He had read it a long time ago and followed everything described there. Manga, however, looked at him puzzled. Sighing, the girl suggested not getting into excessive detail and instead explaining the situation as ancient magic, rather than trying to clarify every single point. Minato added that this magic was sure to work, which surprised Manga quite a bit. She noticed a huge flow of power and magical energy emanating from his body. It was hard for her to understand why Minato was so powerful, but it was already clear that his magic was gradually weakening and fading. In one of the houses, 4 mages gathered to discuss their duties for the upcoming battle. The old man volunteered to represent light, the young sorceress said she had water and air, the blonde-haired guy with black streaks grimly took on fire and water, and the shortest among them would be responsible for earth if they didn't object. Manga thanked leader Rice for gathering so many mages in such a short time. Rice replied that this city was just a test and only ancient magic could stop the demons. Looking up, he couldn't hold back tears of joy. Taking a deep breath, the man spread his arms wide, delighted that they had so skillfully deceived the ruthless monsters and bought themselves some time. The mages, combining their efforts, circled around the magic circle that Minato had drawn in advance, but no effects emanated from it, which greatly confused and even frightened the mages, who had expected immediate results. They declared that none of the elemental attributes had worked and began to doubt whether it was truly a magic circle. But the guy was confident in his circle, noting that it was a very ordinary circle that anyone could use. Manga suggested that it might be a component of attribute magic, which immediately caught the attention of the other mages. Rice quietly whispered to stop the girl and asked how she had such deep knowledge of advanced magical technologies, as she was only a B-rank mage. Manga replied that it was Minato's knowledge, and she couldn't find any magical prerequisites for it. Perhaps it was complex attribute magic, referring to the simultaneous combination of several attributes for activation. The girl didn't see anything special in it, but felt quite strange. The leader continued, explaining that such combinations were only possible with 15 combinations of 2 attributes. But Manga countered that it could also involve 3 or sometimes even more. Rice was surprised, noting that there were too many gifted people in the city then. They asked Minato to continue working on it and decided to trust him while keeping as far away from the demons as possible. The guy asked them not to worry about it. He asked how long he would need to hold back the demons, which made Rice frown in thought. But he couldn't give a precise answer, as he hoped the demons would get bored or hungry and leave, though he also noted they were behaving very strangely. The man added that if Minato's magic was meant to repel demons, then they should have bypassed their city. But they continued to surround the city without retreating, which gave him the creeps. Maina wondered what these monsters wanted to achieve and considered their possible behavioral characteristics. Rice said that these monsters were a fairly ordinary herd, and that they had previously received information that none of them were lagging behind. Minato noted his words and exchanged glances with Amy, expecting an explanation from her. The girl explained that demons that break away from the pack act alone, and if a large group is to be hunted, they always start with individuals who have fallen behind or lost strength. They concluded that there were no stragglers among the demon packs, which surprised the people. Maina, noting that it was a huge pack, suggested that someone might be leading them from the outside. Rice and the sorceress simultaneously suggested that a red egg, the source of strange demonic packs, could be behind it all. Minato asked Maina what exactly a red egg meant. The girl explained that these were mysterious eggs that suddenly appeared in forests and summoned demon packs, but she couldn't be entirely sure about their origin. With nervousness in her voice, she added that demons born from a red egg are reliably known to be easily controlled, which makes them even more dangerous and unpredictable. Minato asked if the demons would disappear if they destroyed this egg. In response, he heard that they would indeed scatter. Everyone then unanimously decided that the red egg must be destroyed at all costs. But Rice stated that it was an impossible task, as the egg was protected by demons. Currently there were about 10 of them, but only once had an egg been successfully destroyed. The previous attempt involved 24 of the strongest travelers, but only 2 were able to destroy the egg, and in this case there were far more demons. Maina was gripped by trembling fear of the impending danger, and her hands involuntarily shook, as if realizing the full weight of the upcoming mission. Minato noted the hopelessness of the situation and admitted that even with 20% of his remaining magic, he wouldn't be able to help at all. In other words, as soon as Minato's magic ran out, the demons would easily break through the walls and bring chaos, death, and the ultimate destruction of the city, leaving behind only ashes and darkness. Thus, the dark-haired young man realized that his magic, which repelled demons, carried a great responsibility for the safety of the city and its inhabitants. He couldn't let the city down and simply give up, but he asked his comrades to slow down and come up with a detailed plan of action if there was a chance for survival. After some thought, Rice said that demons born from a red egg usually move a certain distance away from the egg, and suggested that the travelers take advantage of this. But Minato decided to propose his own plan, which piqued the interest of those present. After he explained his plan of action to them, they decided to accept and act on it, which surprised the young man himself, as he admitted it was a bad idea. However, Rice, with a slight smile, tried to reassure him, saying that he was prepared for a possible negative reaction from the residents, but the guild might well recognize Minato's bold idea. He decided not to delay any longer and proceed with the plan, to which the mages and adventurers supporting him shouted in unison and decisively, having found new hope. Leader Rice ordered Sierra to escort Minato to a high-class room. The girl smiled, accepted the order, and agreed. But as he was about to leave with his blonde companion, a man called out to him, stopping him halfway. He shook the young man's hand and informed him that the city's fate depended on his magical power, wishing him luck in maintaining the barrier for the next 2 days. Minato smiled at Rice's words and gave a short nod, indicating he understood everything perfectly and accepted responsibility for his decision. Meanwhile, the demons were significantly closer to the city walls, where additional defensive mechanisms and fortifications were being built non-stop. The dark-haired adventurer collapsed onto a luxurious sofa in a sparkling room and sighed tiredly. The shadows under his eyes were clearly visible. He was the only one who had managed to push through such a risky idea. He felt awkward about being sent to such a lavish room, sensing he didn't belong to that level of service. Sierra was also with him and decided to open the windows to air out the room. Sierra turned to Minato with enthusiasm and warmly assured him that they would definitely succeed, and he could rely on his allies. But the young man could barely utter a few words, already drifting off to sleep right there on the sofa. All he could do at that moment was maintain the barrier and hold his magic. As he shifted on the sofa, the thought that he had forgotten something lingered in his mind. Sierra approached the young man from behind and looked down at him, remarking that she had never seen bears sleep before. Minato tiredly rubbed his face and explained to the girl that he hadn't slept a wink in 2 nights. Sierra was astonished, noting that he had worked too hard and deserved a rest. She gently asked if he wanted anything to drink, offering a soothing herbal tea. Smiling as she poured him tea, she asked what would happen to the barrier if the adventurer fell asleep. The young man, yawning, replied that the barrier would most likely lose its power. The girl didn't understand what he meant, to which he clarified that the barrier would simply disappear. But suddenly, an alarming thought about the barrier simultaneously crossed their minds, and this realization made both of them frown and become wary. This meant Minato couldn't fall asleep until the mission was complete, but there was only half a day left until the barrier expired. The dark-haired adventurer's plan was to completely abandon the city and leave it. Meanwhile, the diggers were working tirelessly, loosening the heavy soil and collecting sand in bags. One of the diggers suddenly stopped and anxiously asked if the demons were directly beneath them, as he couldn't wait to finally get out of the stuffy underground. The man decided to go for a second round in the excavation to finish the work quickly and avoid mortal danger from the monsters, while the mages sat behind him. The plan required breaking a wide hole in the ground. Their main goal was to create an underground tunnel through which the adventurers and residents could escape the oppressive influence of the mysterious red egg and thus find hope for salvation. The diggers, along with the mages, descended deep underground to break through a passage. Only the strongest and most resilient diggers were among them. One man, drenched in sweat, took off his shirt, and the mages offered to heal his wounds with their magic. So their plan was to bypass the approaching monsters by staying underground and escaping, leaving the city behind. After drawing a magic circle, the mages loudly chanted an excavation spell and the magic activated. Those with the earth attribute used it, just as they had when constructing the defensive wall. The diggers watched the mages' magic in amazement. Since this was independent magic, it didn't require Minato's activation. One of the mages added that it would have been bad if this magic had been part of the demon-repelling spell. One of the mages was intrigued by the magic circle Minato had given them, noting its unusual design and surprisingly low energy consumption compared to similar spells they were used to. A satisfied smile touched his face as he enjoyed the fact that support mages were now so heavily relied upon, and that without them, they wouldn't be able to move forward a single step. By combining their efforts, the diggers and mages increasingly used spacious bags and storage magic, which made the process of clearing and removing soil noticeably faster and more organized. The residents actively passed the filled bags to each other, trying not to delay the work for a moment, as they understood this might be their last chance for survival. Once the ground was prepared, all adventurers and residents would be led out through the tunnels. Minato, on the other hand, needed to focus on reducing his magical power consumption to maintain the demon-repelling magic. During this time, he had managed to drink several cups of tea. The young man just had to wait for the tunnel construction to be completed. His eyes were slowly closing from exhaustion. Sleep was pressing down like a heavy cloud, but at that moment, someone suddenly slapped him on the head, which jolted him awake. Sierra, holding a large, light fan with which she had hit the guy on the head, asked about his condition. Minato thanked the girl for not letting him fall asleep. In his past life, he sometimes went without sleep for 3 days, but he had never experienced such magical exhaustion and noted that he needed to take care of himself. Because if he fell asleep, the demons would break into the city. He understood perfectly well that a huge responsibility for everyone rested on his shoulders, but he couldn't do anything about his body, so he drank another cup of strong tea, hoping to perk up a little and stay awake. Sierra began to wake him persistently, shaking him sharply from side to side and continuously slapping him hard on the head with her fan, then hastily apologized for her actions. The young man calmly replied that he himself had asked her to hit him if he started to fall asleep, and asked her not to take it to heart. He noted in his thoughts that the digging had already been going on for a day and a half, and he should have heard that the tunnel was ready by now, but he hadn't noticed any movement. Anxious thoughts began to torment him that there might have been problems with the digging, but suddenly Sierra brought him back to reality, suggesting they immediately go and personally check the tunnel's condition. She declared that she didn't want to hit him anymore. At this time, all the residents stopped working and sat down in turns as the demons approached the city. To escape through the underground tunnel they had managed to dig, the residents needed to take minimal belongings, and they were warned that there were no good footholds in the tunnel. They waited for the evacuation signal before entering the tunnel. Minato had less than 10% of his magical power left and needed to start acting. Minato and Sierra noticed an earth mage sitting directly on the rocks, utterly exhausted. He persistently demanded to be let into the tunnel to help, but the adventurer firmly refused, urging him to rest at least a little. But the mage exhaled with difficulty, saying that there was very little left for the tunnel to be fully open and that they had already reached the very base of the rock. Minato, catching snippets of their conversation, became interested in what was happening and decided to clarify what exactly they were talking about. The adventurer explained that a hard rock formation was hidden between the loose earth and the tunnel itself. It blocked the way forward like a stone lock, and it was the reason the exit was completely blocked. Because of this, the opening of the path was delayed. Minato understood that they didn't have time to dig another route. The mage wanted to assure them that he could handle it, but due to dehydration, he started coughing, which scared his comrades. Minato asked the adventurer to bring water, but he pointed to a barrel with an awkward expression. To their misfortune, all water sources had been destroyed by the demons, and so there were no more sources of moisture left in the city. The drinking water in the barrels, which could have saved the people, had long since run out, leaving the residents without a single drop. Minato asked if it was possible to summon water using magic, since water supply magic existed. However, the sorceress, who was hanging onto an empty barrel, tiredly replied that with their current power, they could only fill 2 wine barrels, and those were already empty. The dark-haired young man was surprised they had used so much water. Sierra anxiously noted that in their current situation, they needed to do something urgently. Minato, deciding to intervene, asked the mages if they could show him the magic circle previously used for water supply and storage. Upon seeing the inscribed circle, he realized his hunch was correct. It was inefficient. The sorceress explained that this magic was precious knowledge, modified by a great sage. He mentally chastised the creator for their negligence, then offered the mages sheets with a new, improved magic circle. The mages, trying out the new circle, were astonished to see the barrels rapidly filling with water without losing their magical power. The residents watched this miracle with delight. One man even rushed to scoop up a mug of water, but a member of the tunnel-laying team immediately stopped him, hitting him on the head and sternly declaring that they had the first right to drink. Meanwhile, the mages continued to tirelessly fill the barrels with water. Sierra wondered if they could distribute the magic without charging for its use, as it was incredibly valuable, and Minato could be imprisoned for it. The mage, quenching his thirst, replied that for them, using and distributing magic was vital. With the water problem solved, they now needed to address the tunnel issue. Minato pondered that if the rock formations were impervious to drilling magic, perhaps he should use his own offensive magic against the obstruction. Aloud, he mused that Rias might like such an idea. These words immediately caught the attention of the blonde girl standing nearby. She smiled and said that Minato had changed noticeably lately. The girl warmly added that he had started thinking not only about himself but also genuinely cared for the safety of everyone around him. Minato resolutely headed towards the leader, convinced of the correctness of his plan. He thought that even if only a tenth of their magic remained, it would still be enough to create a countermeasure against the demons. He called out loudly to the man, but the leader just sharply turned around and shouted back his complete incomprehension. The leader continued to speak tensely into the transmitter, but suddenly his face contorted into a horrified expression, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Meanwhile, the residents joyfully arrived, showing full barrels and exulting that they once again had water for the journey. But as if oblivious to the crowd around him, he shouted even louder. According to the information received through the communicator, water was gushing from the tunnel ceiling in a powerful stream, and they couldn't stop it. Hearing this news, the residents exchanged horrified glances. Inside the tunnel, water was indeed pouring rapidly, filling the space, and the stream grew stronger with each passing moment. One of the adventurers who was directly inside the tunnel confirmed this information. He said that it was groundwater breaking through and described the flow as extremely strong. According to him, if things continued at this pace, the tunnel would be completely flooded within an hour. The leader, however, still refused to believe it, demanding they stop joking. Minato immediately understood the deadly threat. If the water completely flooded the passage, everything would collapse, cutting off the tunnel and depriving them of their last escape route. He approached the leader and asked about the condition of the tunnel at the very exit. Rice flinched at the unexpected appearance of the young man behind him. At that moment, Maina had already approached the transmitter, explaining that they couldn't even create the slightest crack. Behind her, Amy, along with another adventurer, was desperately trying to punch a hole to direct the water outwards and let it drain away. It was hard for Minato to admit that in such a case they had only one option left: to abandon safety measures. After all, they had initially planned that once the tunnel was open and the residents evacuated, they would block the entrance. The idea was to deter the demons. But the threat remained. The current situation threatened the tunnel with complete flooding, and entering it meant certain death. However, if the residents stayed in the city, the defenses would weaken in less than 12 hours, and the demons would inevitably break in, sweeping away everything in their path. He realized that in this situation there were no guarantees from the start. After some thought, he turned to the leader, Rice. He demanded that the residents be placed in the tunnel, and he himself would block the entrance. The evacuation began. Residents were asked to enter the underground tunnel, maintaining calm. They surveyed the lands beneath which they would have to travel to escape. Minato remained at the entrance, checking for safety. A mistake would cost the lives of all the residents. Under such pressure and immense responsibility, his hands involuntarily trembled. Rice, standing back to back with Minato in the cramped underground passage, announced that all the residents were already inside the tunnel. Without losing a moment, the young man gave him a short but decisive signal to act. The man swung his axe and cut the rope. At that moment, massive wooden beams and debris collapsed directly onto the tunnel entrance, completely blocking the path. Minato and Rice found themselves trapped underground. The young man then summoned magical power, unleashing bright spells against the evil spirits. But the demonic monsters didn't retreat. They continued to advance, heading towards the walls of the deserted city. The protective barrier which once shone above the fortress walls fell. Horrific demonic creatures, foaming at the mouth and drooling, rushed forward with primal roars to destroy buildings and crush stone walls. With the barrier's power released, Minato could now fully utilize his magic, and everything else depended on the stability of the ground. He crouched lower to the ground, preparing to use enhanced magic, which wizards called a race against time. Rice approached the young man, confidently placed a hand on his shoulder, and told him that he would be a novice in this difficult task. After these words, he sharply pushed the young man forward, allowing him to gain rapid speed from a full run. Minato darted ahead, bypassing the residents on the upper path like wind cutting through the darkness. His movements were lightning fast. He pushed off the walls without slowing down, yet still managed not to hinder the residents who were trying to follow behind. In this way, he attacked the monsters directly from underground, piercing their defenses as if with flashes of light. The creatures immediately felt the crushing blows, and the residents, amazed by the spectacle, cheered enthusiastically, boosting his morale. However, the path ahead was blocked again. The leading residents encountered underground water that had cut off the passage. But Minato quickly arrived. He opened his notebook and cast a spell, causing heavy layers of wood to fall onto the current, forming a reliable crossing. The residents joyfully welcomed his solution. Minato, though soaked to the bone from the turbulent currents, continued his journey and didn't allow himself to fall behind. Climbing and pushing off the damp walls, he left the residents behind, moving forward faster and faster. Finally, in the distance, the long-awaited light flickered, breaking through at the end of the underground tunnel. There, he noticed familiar human silhouettes exploring the surroundings. Amy and Maina, hearing his footsteps and breathing, simultaneously turned towards the rapidly approaching young man. Stopping, he crouched before the girls and informed them that reinforcements had arrived. Amy was delighted by her comrade's grand appearance and rushed to hug him, but he stopped her, holding her forehead with his hand. Maina, however, calmly approached the young man, happy about his arrival. They pointed Minato to a huge rock blocking the tunnel entrance, emphasizing its incredible size and massiveness, which made even thinking about easily destroying it impossible. Minato considered that this was the only magic capable of causing strong vibrations, but if directed at the rock repeatedly, the tunnel could become entangled with wisteria. Then they would have to gather all their strength to deliver a final crushing blow. But they didn't have enough magic for such a decisive step, so the young man decided to take a risk, try, and see the plan through. Stretching out, he pointed his hand at the adventurers. They merely exchanged glances, surprised by his bold performance. Minato then said that if they broke the stone, they could pass, after which he knelt on the ground, preparing to use his magic. One of the men was horrified by his actions and loudly reminded him that they were almost completely underwater. But Maina firmly demanded that he not disturb the young man's concentration and let him finish what he started, believing in his strength to the very end. Minato was perfecting the bomb cannon from the offensive magic handbook, pushing it to its absolute limit. His eyes were blurry from sleepiness and his head was throbbing, but he stubbornly continued to draw the circle. Every line required extreme precision to prevent even the slightest magical leakage. After finishing the magic circle, he stood up and for the last time hoped his plan would work. The young man touched the drawn circle with his index finger, pointing it upwards. The others held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. At that very moment, a powerful explosive cannon shot from his finger, soaring as a swift beam straight up into the heart of the cliff, ready to pierce through its thickness. Piercing the solid earth, the magical attack scattered the rock layers, and everything around them erupted in sparks, leaving a deep mark in the soil. The cannon shot upwards, breaking through the barrier. As it burst to the surface, it cleared a path, but at the same instant, rocks crashed down from above, falling directly towards the weakened young man. Manga instantly raised a protective barrier, covering herself and her companions, saving them from the rockslide. But the falling debris had already hit Minato, and he collapsed heavily to the ground, unable to get up. The adventurers immediately rushed to him, one of them looking up in shock at the light bursting from the broken cliff. Through the crack, he could now see the surface and the long-awaited exit from the dungeon. Minato, barely opening his closed eyes, realized he had managed to destroy the barrier and could finally rest. The adventurers rejoiced at his feat, and a horse's elongated head already appeared in the opening. At first, they were scared, thinking it was a demon, but when they saw an unknown figure in dark clothes, they thought it was a human. The light made it difficult to discern their appearance. The girls fluttered around Minato, worried about his condition and trying to bring him back to consciousness, but he could no longer move and his arm fell limply. The stranger turned out to be a girl whose face was hidden behind a mask. She silently watched from above, studying the adventurers with a cold and detached gaze. After some time, Minato slowly opened his eyes and was surprised to see his loyal companions embracing him from both sides, having fallen asleep next to him from exhaustion and worry. A female voice came from the side as the stranger noticed the young man had finally come to. She said the girls were so worried about him that they fell asleep while she was with them. The stranger looked at the young man with a soft smile, happy that he had woken up. She chuckled, saying she was glad he hadn't injured himself while sleeping. The young man simply replied that he knew how to sleep without moving and sat up in bed. The girl unexpectedly burst into ringing laughter, genuinely surprised that two seekers of wisdom who had thought him long dead were shedding bitter tears until she found them in such a strange and almost ridiculous position. He remembered she was the only one who came to rescue them. The girl apologized for giving all the information at once and decided to start by introducing the guild's guesthouse, Maya's. Extending her hand for a firm handshake, she introduced herself as Cardiff and stated she was the head of the local guild branch. Minato, in turn, asked if she had come to rescue them herself, as the city of Maya's had already sent a rescue operation to neighboring cities. Minato shook the commander's hand. Cardiff explained that she had heard from the head of one of Mina's branches that the city was at the center of a monster outbreak, and Minato was the first in history to keep the monsters at bay. She handed him a sheet of paper, asking for his autograph. Minato was surprised to have become so popular in such a short time. Reading the paper, he realized it was a reward receipt for a special request. Cardiff quickly explained that the Adventurers Guild would pay a small reward to everyone who contributed to the evacuation of those in distress, and they had determined the amount of the contribution for the young man. The contribution turned out to be substantial, 30 million zigs for his help. She handed a box to the young man, but he managed to hold such a heavy weight. She assured him they could request a re-evaluation, noting there was a chance to increase the reward, but Minato declined the offer. Deciding not to bother the young man, she said goodbye and left the room, not forgetting to ask him to say hello to the girls. Minato sighed in relief and looked at his sleeping companions. They had slept with him almost all night, and he didn't want to wake them, preferring to quietly slip out and see what was happening in the city. But Manga and Amy immediately stopped him, grabbing his pants. Seeing that they were awake, he was curious why they had fallen asleep next to him. Amy said that Cardiff had been kind and gentle with them, while Manga, on the contrary, emphasized that it was only starting to annoy her. The girl managed to show them the entire house, and Amy noted that they came here regularly. Meanwhile, Cardiff walked through the mansion's corridors, thinking about meeting the legendary Minato, whom everyone was talking about. She assessed that the scale of the outbreak was unusually large, and there was a possibility that some creatures were behind it. Donning her dark cloak, she worried that things might not end the way they wanted. The heroes stepped outside onto a noisy and bustling street. Manga, looking around, told her companions that Maya's was considered the main and most important city in the entire region. The city was a true transportation hub, as almost all roads passed through it. Unceasing trade boomed here. Customers approached stalls, blacksmiths worked skillfully, and artisans and adventurers chatted lively. The city's outer walls looked truly magnificent. Even if 6,000 demons suddenly attacked, the residents would remain relatively safe for a long time. Minato, looking around, noticed structures above and asked about them. Manga explained that observation towers were likely being built to monitor the movements of demons in the area. Minato noted the astonishing speed of construction, to which the girl replied that the city was large and had the best artisans and high-level adventurers working there. Amy pointed to a spacious square where tents were being set up right before their eyes. The inn was already critically short of space, so all the refugees from the destroyed city gathered here in the open. The refugees began to celebrate loudly in honor of their miraculous rescue. They chatted animatedly, sharing fears about standing shoulder-deep in water, rejoiced about future money, and some enjoyed their meal, greedily devouring appetizing fried chicken. Minato smiled at the scene and was glad that everyone was safe. He received news that he had been carried while he slept. Amy confirmed this, adding that it had been a struggle to carry him away. She suggested going to the rescued people and was sure that everyone would want to thank the guy. But he refused, not wanting to elevate himself so highly. Besides, he already had other plans. The heroes sat down at one of the small tables in a cozy cafe and ordered pie. He was asked if it was possible that the large capsule found in the ruins was the true essence of the red egg. Minato pondered, recalling the artificial magical intelligence. Manga, carefully biting into a piece of pie, objected, saying that she hadn't noticed any magic in the huge capsule. Amy, meanwhile, devoured piece after piece, and the guy noted that a strong source of magic, which wasn't there, was required for a demon outbreak. The girl took out a map and placed it directly on the table, agreeing with Minato's concerns. She had received this map from Rice. It marked the explosion site, presumably near the red egg, not far from the found ruins. The guy was deeply concerned about why he hadn't noticed all these alarming signs earlier, as they could have taken countermeasures then. Manga agreed, adding that the web of demons among the residents didn't mean the end, suggesting that the worst was yet to come. Looking at the refugees who sat near tents with their children and rejoiced at their salvation, they realized nothing would end until the people of Mania returned to their homeland. Minato suggested that they would have to fight 6,000 demons or directly strike the red egg. Manga thought about it and said that if they gathered a large group, they could defeat it, although it would be a lot of trouble. However, she added that this was only a backup plan, as nothing would be better than if the demons disappeared naturally and inexplicably, without the intervention of heroes and large-scale battles. Finishing her meal, Amy abruptly stood up from her chair and offered her version. If the egg was indeed there, it might be under the huge capsule. She mentioned a strange smell in that place which surprised her companions, who wondered why she had been silent earlier. But she waved off the questions, explaining that her magic was at its limit, and she didn't want to expose the team to new danger like the mechanical dragon. Minato, smiling awkwardly, agreed with the girl and thought that her intuition was often true, so the egg's location might not be far. Minato hoped that in the future they could use her keen sense of smell as a kind of sensor to find the mysterious egg, which could be hidden underground or inside unknown structures. He asked the girl to explain exactly what the red egg smelled like. But the girl, with her arms crossed, briefly explained that it smelled exactly the same as where they were currently located. However, she couldn't elaborate on her remark because her attention was suddenly diverted by an intense and piercing cold that made it difficult to focus on her own thoughts and impressions. She lifted her companion's cloak and carefully snuggled underneath it, trying to warm herself from the chilling cold, which inadvertently embarrassed Manga. Minato, rising from his chair, asked the girl if she was suddenly shivering and feeling so cold. But Amy calmly replied that it wasn't the cold at all, but rather a sense of dread about the place. He then asked if there were any demons nearby, but Manga firmly rejected the idea, carefully looking around herself. However, after her words, the guy still became wary and anxiously scanned the surrounding area. He recalled Sierra's words about her uncertainty regarding how water and sticky magic spread, and he speculated that hidden and invisible observers might indeed be watching them. Suddenly, he was able to understand the girl's feelings and felt the intense stares of others himself, which made him anxiously look around, trying to distinguish a potential hidden pursuer among the ordinary crowd. However, he couldn't spot anyone suspicious or unusual among the townspeople, who continued with their usual activities and paid no attention to the travelers. Minato thought it might all just be his imagination, as Amy's intuition usually only worked near ruins, and he doubted that a human could be following them. But behind a wall, a young man in uniform was lurking, clutching a magic transmitter and carefully observing their movements. Mena informed the guy that she had already contacted the guild, relaying information that the city was quiet and peaceful, and they were currently just gathering information about the pressure. But Minato ironically asked if Amy would finally emerge from someone else's cloak, to which Mena responded with doubt, saying she felt like a dome sheltering her friend. The latter continued to cling to her, unwilling to pull away, and Mena asked her to stop. Minato, observing this scene, realized he didn't need to worry about either of them at all. He suggested that the girls return to the guild's guest house. In the stuffy and cramped bathroom, there was a barrel filled with hot water, next to which lay used and lathered soap. Mena and Amy decided to take a hot bath to get rid of the unpleasant sensation Amy had mentioned. Mena asked the girl if she felt better and if she had been able to relax, but Amy still felt cold. Minato was sitting right on the floor outside the door. The girls asked him if he was still there, to which he responded, confirming his presence with his voice. They didn't want the guy to leave and continued talking to him, trying to lighten the mood, even asking him to play a musical instrument. But Minato persistently refused, feeling like he was putting children to bed. Amy, pouting, sank deeper into the water. Minato understood that something was bothering the girl and she wanted to be distracted. Taking out his notebook, he considered using magic to cheer the girl up, but he abandoned the idea. He was still unsure if he was ready to use magic and decided to improve his magic for efficiency first, but he continued to look for alternatives, opening his magic storage. After a while, the bathroom door opened. Amy was the first to emerge from the bathroom, immediately hugging the young man despite her hair still being wet. Mena peeked out from behind the door, noticing that the girl seemed more comfortable with Minato. Sitting down next to the young man and the girl, who was already comfortably resting her head on his lap, Mena noticed the girl's resemblance to a lazy cat basking serenely in the sun. Minato agreed with her observation. With a cautious expression, the young man asked the girl why Amy looked so worried, suggesting it might be related to the massive horde of 6,000 creatures in manhwa heading straight for them. But Mena firmly dismissed this unsettling guess, stating that demons born from a red egg simply aren't capable of such military maneuvers. However, the young man suggested they still consider that possibility. Lowering her voice, the girl decided to share her thoughts on the matter with him. She directly stated that the entire city could be destroyed if the demons reached them. Mayas was considered the largest and most significant city in the region, serving as a vital logistical hub. If it were surrounded by demons, all essential trade and military routes would be immediately cut off, and nearby towns and villages would fall in its wake. Minato grasped her line of thinking and clarified the scale of the potential damage, noting that its catastrophic consequences couldn't even be compared to what happened in manhwa, as they were talking about a significantly larger area. The realization of all this made the young man himself anxious and uneasy. Mena, noticing his distress, tried to comfort him with words, but he pointed out that Amy had been feeling unwell even before the demon attack. Gently placing his palm on her head, he used dryness magic to dry her hair faster and worried about her current state, suspecting that what was happening could lead to something far more serious. Mena replied that they had no choice but to wait for news, pointing to the magic transmitter that was supposed to relay the long-awaited information from the guild about further actions and decisions. But suddenly, a sharp voice came from the communicator, which the girl hadn't expected at all, and startled, she dropped the transmitter to the floor. Minato caught the device in time, from which voices continued to demand a response. The heroes stood before the massive entrance to the Maya's guild hall. They had been summoned here in advance, but inside there were many adventurers. Minato wondered why everyone had been gathered and what awaited them. He carried Amy on his back, saying she could have stayed in the room to rest. The girl firmly replied that she would be better off by his side. The crowd of adventurers loudly discussed rumors that someone had seen something suspicious at the observation deck. Men were on duty at the observation deck, monitoring the surroundings beyond the city walls, and they were the ones who noticed a huge number of demons unexpectedly emerging from the recent explosion zone. But the demons stood motionless, making no attempts to move, which looked like a menacing lull and hinted at a new type of outbreak. The men argued, discussing the numbers, but decided that the alarm might be false. However, one of the adventurers suddenly loudly declared that the number of monsters had reached 40,000. Minato was horrified by this news, noting that it was 6 times more than what they had already faced in manhwa. He clearly understood that something was truly wrong, but such numbers seemed unreal. Calling Amy, the young man asked her directly if there was a real reason for her anxious shivers and worry. Hearing the question, the girl squeezed her eyes shut and sharply focused, which confused Maina. The crowds of adventurers were greatly alarmed by the spreading rumors and were now awaiting an official statement about the reason for the gathering. If 40,000 monsters proved to be true, the city's residents would simply panic. Finally, guards came out onto the balcony, lining up strictly after receiving orders. The army lined up in a precise and even formation. Their sudden appearance caught the attention of the crowd, and people exclaimed that it was the Cardiff Squad. Maina confirmed that it was a personal guard made up of loyal men and women ready to die for their commander. At a signal, the warriors uniformly struck their long iron spears against the ground, as if saluting and greeting the commander who stood before them in all her strictness and grandeur. The guild branch head herself, Mayasa Cardiff, came out to the adventurers and enthusiastically expressed her joy at seeing everyone present and feeling their readiness for action. She loudly announced that news had reached them of 40,000 new demons born from a red egg, and now a new outbreak was rapidly approaching their city. The residents, convinced of the validity of their fears, merely exchanged anxious glances. Cardiff informed everyone gathered that in just 24 hours, Maya's would be at the epicenter of the upcoming events, and there was critically little time for preparation. But then she immediately offered a way out of this seemingly hopeless situation: to form combat squads, spreading her arms wide. With an enthusiastic cry, she raised one hand upwards, demonstrating her resolve, and declared that their main goal would be to attack the location of the red egg. Then she sharply lowered her hand and clenched her fingers into a fist, adding forcefully that they would destroy the cursed egg, leaving it no chance of revival. Placing one foot on the railing and leaning slightly on it, Cardiff admitted that the number of demons significantly outnumbered their forces, but assured them that if they managed to break through, they would certainly achieve victory. The adventurers bombarded the commander with questions, doubting the plan and deeming it impossible to break through hordes of demons to the egg. But the young woman confidently stated that it was much better than hopelessly defending the city from an influx of monsters. She announced that she was taking full responsibility for the consequences of this dangerous decision, and standing firmly on the railing, definitively confirmed her choice. She declared that she would personally lead the entire column. Minato smiled at her determination and admired that the commander herself intended to destroy the egg. Cardiff announced that everyone willing to participate in the destruction of the red egg should gather at the same spot exactly at noon the next day, after which she concluded the meeting. She re-entered the mansion, accompanied by her loyal army. The residents remaining in the square were astonished by her speech and began shouting her name loudly. An enthusiastic crowd surrounded the heroes, continuing to support and praise Cardiff, as if finding salvation and hope for the future in her words. Minato noted the young woman's excessive charisma and her army, whose morale differed strikingly from Mainhir's. Maina called him in a quiet whisper, and he agreed to move away from the noise to talk. They moved to a quiet, deserted alley, and the guy asked for their opinion on the commander's plan that had been announced earlier. Maina remarked that 6,000 people against 40,000 demons wouldn't survive, as hordes of monsters would attack from the side and instantly crush them. Amy, hearing these words, agreed with her thoughts. Clutching her staff closer, the young woman suggested that Cardiff had probably calculated all of this long ago and chosen such a course of action in advance. Her army will leave the city 3 hours before the demons arrive, and it seems they hope the monsters will disappear in time, avoiding unnecessary deaths. Sitting on a wooden box with her knees tightly clasped to her chest, Amy quietly said that she didn't want an even more terrible outcome to happen. Minato admitted that he had considered such a plan himself and suggested they go search for the egg before Cardiff and his army did. The girl's eyes widened in surprise. Maina replied that only they would be able to find the exact location of the egg before departure, which would significantly reduce casualties. They were surprised by the decision to go as a trio, but they had no doubt that the guy had a plan. Minato understood that if he showed his enhanced magic to anyone else, it could lead to trouble, and he had no intention of sharing his abilities with anyone. He explained to the girls that no one should know about their plan, as they were the only ones who would risk going with him. Minato was already a public figure, possessing 5 types of magic and ancient spells. Amy and Maina hadn't expected such secrecy and caution from him, surprised by the changes in his character. The very next day, the heroes set out to find the red egg and descended into the dungeon, where Amy actively sniffed out any traces that could lead them to their goal. She called out to her companions, informing them that she could smell the egg's location and pointed with her hand, explaining that the scent was thicker there and it scared her even more. Manga confirmed that the travelers were moving in the right direction. She knew that the egg was likely located in roughly the same place where they had previously found the ruins. Amy herself had earlier hypothesized the egg's possible location, and with each new step, her guess seemed more accurate, strengthening the team's confidence. At this point, the heroes were busy charting the shortest path to the red egg of doom. Minato, using his improved excavation magic, continued to dig in the correct direction. Before them, a vast magic circle opened up, continuously excavating the path. The guy, reflecting on all the effort Manga had put into her work, refined this spell, saving himself from the exhausting time spent clearing soil. Assuming the egg truly rested directly beneath the ancient ruins, they had managed to advance approximately 2/3 of the way. The excavation was going well, and now they could rely not on Manga's skills, but solely on Amy's heightened sense of smell. Manga took 2 magic communicators, handing one to the girl, and said she was returning to the surface. She asked Amy to contact her in case of danger. The girl was delighted, as she was rarely entrusted with such valuable tools. Before leaving, the girl called Minato to give him a gift, which piqued the young man's interest, as it was the first time she had ever given him anything. Then, opening her own magic storage, Manga pulled out only half of some item and handed it to him, saying that in case of trouble, this item might prove useful and truly come in handy. The guy, of course, expected a small gift from the girl, but he certainly didn't expect to see a pickaxe. Taking the tool, he was more interested in which side to use it correctly, which embarrassed Manga with his ignorance. She decided to take the gift back, thinking that he might not need the pickaxe since his mana had already fully recovered, and noted that his recovery speed was quite strange. Minato, on the other hand, wanted to take the tool, explaining that it would be useful to him and he wanted to conserve his strength. The girl decided not to argue with the guy and handed him the pickaxe, which he couldn't hold due to its weight, and immediately dropped to the ground. Amy waved to her friend and said goodbye. Manga, in turn, returned the gesture. The girl turned to the guy and put on a headband with cat ears, as if ready for work. She confidently declared that they would outrun the commander and find the egg. Minato, however, was surprised when a simple race turned into almost a battle in her words. Amy, feeling a bit embarrassed, admitted that she felt better once she finally understood the source of her anxieties. Minato was surprised that simply realizing the reasons for her worry could calm her down. She confirmed it, and he clarified if she truly understood their current situation. After all, things would get much more serious once they finally found the egg. In his thoughts, he even began to doubt if they would have enough strength to reach that point. The excavation here allowed them to ignore the 40,000 monsters outside, but they wouldn't be able to avoid the upcoming battles with those protecting the egg. Amy, however, clenched her fist, confident that Manga's return to the surface could mean calling for reinforcements, allowing them to overcome their enemies. She added that the girl was excellent at negotiations and was sure she would return with a crowd of adventurers ready to help, despite Minato's hidden and suspicious personality. He remembered her words about his character, noting to himself that in that case she should probably stay away from him, and admitted it would be great if Manga could bring at least 30 people. Amy reminded the young man that she was no longer afraid but ready to fight. The guy secretly agreed and continued digging, while the girl animatedly demonstrated her combat moves and skills. Suddenly, the magic communicator vibrated. The girl picked it up, answering the incoming call, but didn't notice she was holding the device upside down, which Minato immediately noticed and chuckled slightly. Manga informed them that she had reached the tunnel exit, but Amy couldn't hear her words due to the magical device's incorrect position, and the connection remained just static for her. Minato then asked her to hand him the communicator and immediately answered Manga. The girl was surprised to see the device in his hands, as she had just given it to Amy. But she continued to talk about her observations. There was no movement from the watchtower, but it didn't seem like the monster's advance speed had changed. She didn't understand why the monsters were moving much slower than those in Manga. While Amy continued talking to her friends from the dungeon, 2 people, one of whom was a mage, secretly watched her from behind. The young man warned that as soon as Manga moved, the mage had to destroy the hole. but Mena herself instantly sensed the presence of a powerful sorcerer nearby. She approached the hiding spies and initially thought it was reinforcements, which made her unable to contain her joy. But the strangers, seeing her, immediately retreated and headed in an unknown direction. The girl was slightly offended by such behavior and her voice became noticeably quieter. Minato asked why such a change had occurred, but Amy refused to answer. Instead of explaining, she said that her mana was recovering slower than his, but she would do her best to fix it. Minato could no longer continue digging as the magic circle had stopped working. Checking the reason, they encountered solid rock. His spell was too weak and he didn't dare to use the explosive cannon as a collapse would be inevitable. Amy, with a sly smile, reminded the young man about Mena's gift. Minato immediately noticed the pickaxe hanging on his back as if waiting for this very moment. Taking the tool in his hands, he assessed its weight and power, assuming it was a well-known and respected item in their world. Amy's eyes sparkled with anticipation. She enjoyed watching Minato use an ordinary item instead of magic. Accepting the gift from his companion, he raised the pickaxe above him but couldn't maintain his balance. The tool's weight was too great and he immediately almost stumbled. The scene was awkward. The guy didn't know how to wield a pickaxe, awkwardly swung it and froze in a strange pose. When he straightened up, he was visibly trembling, realizing that this tool couldn't just be picked up and easily used right away. The girl's face suddenly turned red, and with a trembling voice, she offered the guy her help. But the guy, slightly embarrassed by what happened, refused the help. Amy, however, covered her mouth with her hands and trembled, trying to hold back her laughter. He decided to use magic to improve the material. Holding the pickaxe so high above his head, he couldn't aim properly, so he started hitting the rocks from the side. There was a flash, but the travelers didn't see any immediate results. Swinging the pickaxe with effort once more, the guy struck the rocks and they unexpectedly began to give way under the weight. This caused the young man to lose his balance, stumble, and fall down a dangerous cliff. A dark cave opened before his eyes and a muffled rumble echoed from its depths, making his eyes widen in genuine surprise. Amy saved him from a complete fall by grabbing the edge of his cloak just in time. He asked her to let go, explaining that it would save them time, but she refused, pulled him back, and warned him about poisonous fumes. Minato asked Amy how much she knew about caves. It turned out she had visited a few during ruin explorations, but she admitted that Mena understood caves much better. Amy remembered that canaries could detect poison and was about to go get one with Mena, but Minato stopped her, reminding her about the magic communicator. However, the girl didn't hear him. Her trail had already vanished with her speed. Pondering Amy's words, Minato pulled out his notebook and quickly began drawing a magic circle suitable for the situation. After finishing the drawing, he transferred it to his hands and cast a spell called Poison Detection. Spraying magic throughout the cave, it helped locate the poisonous pores, which, fortunately for the hero, were not nearby. He didn't wait for his friend to return and decided to go down by himself to explore the cave. Minato assessed that the floor looked quite safe and decided to contact Mena after he had a more detailed look around. After a while, he managed to contact the sorceress and shared the news that he had stumbled upon a cave during his excavations. Mena was surprised and warned him against hasty actions without equipment, but he managed to warn her that Amy was already heading her way. However, a strange and incomprehensible explosion suddenly erupted right behind him, very close by. The explosion was so powerful that its flash and roar were noticeable even deep within the forest. Soon, thick black smoke rose into the air and the young man was momentarily deafened, losing his orientation. Minato still held the communicator from which the girl's anxious voice could be heard, worried about his condition. This explosion alarmed him even more, and he speculated that these tremors might be related to the Red Egg of Doom. Coming to his senses, he replied that he was alive and asked about Amy. But Amy hadn't reached Mena yet. She replied that she was already heading to the tunnel and asked about the origin of the tremors. Hearing that they were coming from deep within the tunnel, the girl was very surprised and even scared. Soon, Amy had to run with all her might as rocks, dislodged by the explosion, rained down on her. The girl was rushing towards the exit when she suddenly noticed Mena waiting for her ahead, peeking her head out from behind a hole. Amy ran and jumped straight to her friend, hugging her tightly. They both landed on the ground and, catching their breath, immediately turned towards the tunnel from which booming sounds echoed. Now the exit was completely blocked by rocks, making Minato's rescue significantly more difficult. Maina informed him of this and assured him that Amy was now safe with her. The guy smiled, glad the girls were unharmed and wasn't worried about himself. Minato had very little time to dig his way back. Amy worried about his situation while Maina searched for a way out. They noticed a red flag waving on the watchtower, a signal that monsters had been spotted nearby despite their usually slow pace. It soon became clear that mutated wolves were starting to gather towards Maya's. Minato suspected that their sudden speed and the recent explosion might be interconnected. The commander quickly reacted to the new threat and, without waiting for the appointed time, ordered the operation to begin earlier than planned. The watchtowers continued to wave the red flag, and the girls watched the alarming signal intently, realizing that danger was now very close. The army had already formed up and was preparing to deploy. Voluntary adventurers who had agreed to help joined them. Amy and Maina informed Minato that they were staying in the city to fight and asked him to deal with the egg. He wished them caution. After ending the call with the girls, Minato again pondered their words about the egg. Realizing he would have to find it himself, he used healing magic on himself, mending the wounds and abrasions left by the explosion. The explosion was too powerful to be accidental, and it had enough force to blow a person apart. This meant the young man was already very close to the anomaly and thus to the egg itself. Standing up, he continued his search. He was heading in an unknown direction with only endless darkness awaiting him ahead. There was no way out, and he didn't want to be trapped underground, only to survive and return to the surface to find the city completely destroyed. Minato carefully looked around, illuminating the dark space with his magic. Rumors said that monsters swarmed around the red egg of doom. Looking down, he saw the roots of the earth, which seemed to stretch and lead him to a specific spot deep within the cave. Following these routes, he soon found himself facing a terrifying sight. He saw monsters that had just been born after the explosion, including mutated rats, distorted wolves, and other disfigured animals that inspired fear just by their appearance. The space ahead opened up in a fan shape, covering a radius of about 100 meters. It was all filled with a suspicious, thick fog. Apparently, this fog was the source of the monster's birth, and he wondered if he had already reached the location of the red egg. Soon, he noticed that the fog was flowing out of a deep iron hole, and he speculated that the egg might be inside it. Drawing his conclusions, he began preparations to break through and reach his cherished goal. To achieve his plan, he needed to overcome a whole cluster of newly born monsters. Opening his magic storage, he invoked control magic and summoned many daggers, which obediently rose into the air, and then directed them straight towards his enemies. He engraved a magic circle of control spell on 100 monster daggers he had obtained during his first quest, and to stop the daggers from functioning, he used lightning magic. Such tricks allowed the guy to partially control the weapons remotely, directing their actions and attacks. However, today he was going to use them completely differently, as he didn't know how much strength would be needed, and considered it pointless to needlessly get into a bloody fight. He carefully stepped onto the blade of a dagger, trying to balance himself. Thanks to a floating spell previously cast on the daggers, they became an unstable support. Minato cautiously stepped from one hovering dagger to another, trying not to lose his balance and fall down into the swarm of teeming monsters, and not to attract their attention. It took about 150 steps to cover 100 meters, so he moved the knives from behind his back to the front to have enough for the remaining distance. But one of the monsters noticed him and instantly attacked the young man, opening its maw. When the mutated rat unexpectedly lunged at him, Minato managed to defend himself. Controlling the blades, he directed them into the monster's body, and the daggers pierced its flesh from two sides, paralyzing the animal and stopping its further movement. But now the wolves had also discovered his presence. A pack of monsters rushed at the guy, and realizing the danger, he decided not to fight but to run past, jumping across the daggers that were making a path for him. However, while fending them off, he increasingly lost his footing. He needed to reach the hole before he ran out of monster daggers. Gathering speed and strength, Minato made a sharp jump and flew directly into the iron opening, escaping the attacking monsters. In this narrow and confined space, he finally had an opportunity for a counterattack. He pulled a pickaxe from his storage and prepared to face the approaching demons. But when they ran up to the opening, they couldn't get inside, staggering back each time as if an invisible barrier stood before them, blocking the way. Turning back, the guy noticed that he was in a completely snow-white room where there was not a single detail or object, only emptiness and silence surrounding him from all sides. As he continued to look around, he realized the room wasn't that big. It was no more than 20 meters from one end to the other. Judging by the material of the walls, it was part of ancient ruins hidden deep underground. Minato stopped dead in his tracks because right before him was his long-awaited goal. However, he was greatly confused by the unusual appearance of the egg, which he had not expected to see at all. All the stories and legends claimed that the egg of doom should be red, but now, right in front of him, it was blue, resting on a mechanical device and glowing softly in the pristine white room. After thinking for a while, he opened his notebook with the magic circle and decided to use it. To avoid wasting any time, he intended to quickly destroy the egg and cast a spell. But suddenly, small cubes formed above, connecting to each other. An enormous, terrifyingly massive dark cube suddenly appeared above Minato and the mysterious egg, and this unexpected sight immediately diverted the young man's attention from his focus and intended action. He didn't immediately realize what was before him and pondered the purpose of such a strange object appearing in the middle of the room. The massive structure completely blocked his view of the egg, so the young man tried various ways to break through the cube or at least get around it. Minato took a step to the side, trying to find a clear shot at the egg through the cube's shadow as it was blocking his offensive spells. But at that moment, a deep, strange sound emanated from within. Through that sound, a mechanical voice unexpectedly cut through, coming directly from the cube, and it began to assess the threat level. It was so sudden that it surprised Minato. He was keenly interested in the possibility of engaging in dialogue with this enigmatic object and was ready to bombard it with questions. But before he began, the young man extinguished his magic and politely introduced himself. The cube clearly spoke Minato's name, characterizing him as a transcendent S-rank object. The young man didn't understand the meaning of such a classification when suddenly, the cube began to separate into smaller cubes. In a matter of moments, the cube transformed into an animal-like form and, menacingly looming over the egg, began to protect it. Minato realized that this machine was acting as the egg's protector, and he was astonished that it had transformed into either a guard dog or a mighty bull. But it was clear the cube had no intention of listening to his words. Magnetic waves appeared on the surface of the cube's two lamps, beginning to fluctuate wildly, and following this, destructive incineration activated. The machine instantly directed an electrical discharge at Minato, but the young man managed to create defensive magic in time and erect a barrier that withstood the deadly blow. The impact was so powerful that Minato barely stayed on his feet, and his barrier cracked, enduring the force of the attack. The machine assessed that it had no effect and sent a request to exceed the limit, which was instantly accepted. It announced that the first level of the monolimiter had been removed. The young man noticed that the machine wasn't yet serious about fighting and was surprised that he would have to battle such an opponent. He immediately used various spells: water cannon, fire volley, thunder cannon, and wind attack. He unleashed all these attacks on the machine before it could make another move, carefully watching to see if his spells could crush the steel opponent. Soon, smoke enveloped the battlefield. Once the smoke cleared, it was obvious that their combined attacks had no effect on the machine, which was already preparing to unleash another assault. Minato figured his magic was too weak to deal any damage. The machine loudly announced the activation of a new attack and rained down a series of devastating blows on the young man. Minato tried to defend himself by strengthening his barrier, but at the same time, he couldn't figure out how to disable the enemy. He remembered his ultimate nameless spell and thought it might be able to hit this dog bull machine, but he doubted if it would give him enough time to prepare such a powerful ability. The machine removed its limiter, and Minato reasoned that if he could hold out long enough, the mechanism would overheat and self-destruct. However, there was also the possibility that he would die first. If magic wasn't doing much, he tried the next option and grabbed his pickaxe, still doubting its effectiveness against the massive mechanical Hulk. But he decided to take the risk and try it, as he had no other path to victory left. He struck the metallic body with all his might, but the powerful recoil made the weapon slip from his trembling hands, and Minato braced himself for his tragic demise. At that moment, the machine activated a new strike. It aimed directly at the flying pickaxe and completely shattered the sharp point of its blade, slicing the tool in midair. Minato noticed that the machine attacked the discarded pickaxe, not him, and wondered if there was something strange about its initial trajectory. He saw that heavy magic crystals were located exactly where the pickaxe was supposed to land. Minato assumed their presence had a special meaning but decided not to delve into the matter for now. These crystals were a rare, explosive type of magic stone controlled by the guild. Any impact would release a monstrous amount of mana, and in the previous world they were used for military purposes. The fact that the machine protected them meant that an explosion could damage it. Realizing this, Minato opened the magic circle on his hand and, with a smirk, understood that he had found a way to victory in such a desperate situation. He directed a fiery attack towards the heavy magic crystals, which the machine immediately noticed and deflected. Minato was surprised that it finally moved away from the egg. With his other hand, he activated a glowing magic circle towards the egg and, with a hint of light, teasing mockery in his voice, asked the machine if it was truly confident in its current and vulnerable location. He recalled an old proverb from his past life: "If you chase two rabbits, you'll catch neither," and, smirking maliciously at the machine, he asked what exactly it intended to protect first in case of danger. If the machine tried to protect two different things at once, it would fail. The machine immediately returned to protecting the egg, which made the young man smile. Instead of directly attacking the egg, he chose to focus on destroying the dangerous and unstable magic crystals, which could detonate even from the slightest touch, turning the entire room into a blazing inferno of destruction. The machine couldn't even predict that the young man would dare to shoot while within the deadly blast radius. The attack instantly reached the crystals, which immediately caused a devastating explosion, forcing Minato to dive for cover. He immediately used magic and noted that during the long preparation for this dangerous battle, the spell he had spent the most effort and energy on was a defensive one. It was supposed to withstand the destruction of even ancient ruins. After all, if this room was indeed part of ancient ruins, the walls should be incredibly strong and stable. Hiding behind his protective barrier, he pressed himself against a wide pillar and pulled up his hood, waiting for the explosion to end. The explosion was deafening, echoing loudly off the stone walls, and afterward the room was engulfed in smoke and flames. Cracks appeared on the walls and columns, and the entire hall darkened from the corrosive fire and the smell of superheated stone. But the machine, sacrificing its life, still managed to protect the egg, keeping it intact. However, its self-sacrifice only gave Minato the opportunity to finally get close to the target and destroy the Egg of Doom once and for all. Using magic, he shattered the egg with a crunching sound. It instantly covered in cracks and crumbled like fragile glass into many small, sparkling fragments. At the same time, the group of travelers was fighting monsters in a dense forest. But soon, they noticed that the monsters began to gradually disappear, which caused great confusion among the heroes. Among the travelers, assumptions immediately arose that this was happening precisely because of Minato's intervention. More and more people were convinced that he was involved in what was happening. Maina and Amy looked around in bewilderment, listening to the crowd. The girls exchanged astonished glances, not entirely believing the words that were coming from all directions. Unable to hold back their emotions, the girls, with tears in their eyes, joyfully rushed to each other and hugged tightly, as if they had finally found the long-awaited certainty that he was indeed alive and had achieved their common goal. After some time, Minato slowly returned to the back gates of the city of Mayasa. The observation decks were already empty there, and the bright flags no longer fluttered, making the place seem quiet. Sighing, he felt the relief of returning to familiar places. But suddenly his attention was drawn to a strange movement ahead, which made him wary. An entire army of warriors, led by an unknown young man, unexpectedly emerged from the gates. Minato noticed that this person looked exactly like a guild employee and was accompanied by Cardiff's elite knights. The warriors approached the young man in an even formation, but he assumed their purpose was to investigate the recent events. However, the stranger suddenly stopped right in front of him and asked if he was indeed Minato. Minato didn't even have time to answer before his hands were clamped in sturdy, heavy handcuffs. The stranger was about to ask an important question that he had specifically saved for the dark-haired youth. But before continuing, he dismissed the knights, ordering them to return to the city while he and Minato would go together. After that, the man pressed a strange brick in the wall, which subtly receded inward. A hidden secret door opened before the young men. Stepping inside, they found themselves in an underground prison which, in addition to its main purpose, also served as a secret passage. The guild employee pushed open the massive cell door and asked Minato to enter and wait there for a while, promising to explain everything later. Once inside the cramped room, Minato sat at a rough wooden table where a single burning candle flickered. He was tormented by the question of why he had been arrested so suddenly and what might await him now. He tugged at the handcuffs, testing their strength, and realized he wouldn't be able to remove them by force. After locking up the young man, the guards did not use excessive measures and treated him quite gently. Minato concluded that obeying the guild's orders would be calmer than resisting, though he acknowledged the risk of such a hasty decision. The young man had a feeling as if he had seen the guy who put the shackles on him before. But the guy's face was hard to remember, yet Minato was sure he had seen him previously. Muffled voices discussing the unsuccessful search for someone's tracks came from the dark corridor, and it was clear that heightened caution and extreme vigilance were necessary. But Minato was lost in thought about the guild employee, because his memory of him was intertwined with a strong impression of one of his companions. After he recalled the identities of the strangers, the door to the room finally opened after some time. He remembered exactly who had entered, Commander Cardiff and her assistant, who had previously been behind her at the inn. Minato wondered why Cardiff had decided to arrest him. The young woman expressed her joy at seeing him alive and well. Cardiff entered without a word and walked over to the table where Minato sat in shackles. Pushing a chair aside, she sat opposite him, crossing her legs, a calm smile playing on her lips. Tilting her head slightly, Cardiff rested her chin on her palm and continued to smile mysteriously. Minato was the first to speak, asking her to explain the reason for his arrest. Cardiff just licked her lips contentedly and silently watched the young man. The young woman slowly broke the silence, informing Minato that the reason for his arrest was suspicion of intending to tunnel into Maya's to let hordes of monsters inside. Minato just sighed in surprise, as they had indeed made a tunnel leading to the Red Egg of Doom, but without knowing the backstory, it looked as if the tunnel had been created to move monsters from underground directly into the city, and he agreed that the situation looked suspicious. He was about to refute the suspicions, but Cardiff immediately spoke up, saying that she had already talked to the knowledge seekers and his teammates. According to the girls, the three of them had been digging the tunnel. However, Minato realized that the girls hadn't been able to clearly explain the situation to the commander. This only complicated his position. Cardiff began to mimic their voices, recounting their words about the egg's destruction and the subsequent collapse. Her imitation surprisingly accurately conveyed Amy's character, her ringing voice, lightness, and excessive activity. She continued to reproduce her speech, including words about the monsters disappearing and Minato's successful work. Minato noted Cardiff's skill, and she admitted it was her special ability. Slapping her palm sharply on the table, she returned to her normal voice, leaned closer to the young man, and with cold interest, asked how he had defeated the hordes of monsters. Her gaze darkened and her smile took on an ominous tint. She slowly asked the young man if she should believe the fairy tale about a mage who single-handedly charged into numerous hordes of enemies. Minato struggled to explain that the egg had already been destroyed by the time he arrived. Deep down, he decided to play the simpleton just to avoid attracting even more suspicion. But Cardiff's distrust only intensified. She continued to pierce him with her gaze, and unable to bear the weight of it, the young man turned away. In his thoughts, he admitted that continuing to play the fool would be extremely difficult. With a sigh, he opened his magic storage, from which a stone appeared, and he wasn't sure if it could serve as proof. This round gemstone had been in the room where he destroyed the egg. After the egg was destroyed, Minato was slightly disappointed, admitting he wished he could have taken a piece of the broken shell with him, but he couldn't find any remnants anywhere. But among the pile of stones and mechanical debris, something sparkled, catching the young man's attention. Digging it out, he picked up the sparkling stone, which was exactly the same color as the egg. A guild employee approached them and carefully took the stone from Minato with a towel. After checking it with a special device, he confirmed that it was a genuine crystal of doom. Minato asked the young woman if they were already familiar with this item. Cardiff replied that such jewels appear when the Red Egg of Doom is destroyed. Hearing her answer, he realized he had found the perfect piece of evidence for himself. But the commander noticed a different color to the stone. It wasn't red, but blue. She asked how that happened, and the young man, with some effort, admitted he didn't know. He wanted to mention the egg's color but decided against it. Cardiff glanced at her assistant, who nodded, understanding her look. Cardiff placed the crystal on a clean table and gently rotated it, explaining that crystals of doom are high-quality magical catalysts, but their inner power can also reveal a lot. These stones were considered the source of monster appearances, and there was a possibility they were artificially created, which caused considerable alarm among those present. Picking up the crystal, Cardiff examined it closely and asked Minato if she could take the find for further analysis. Minato decided not to oppose the commander's wishes and explained that he had brought it with him so they could jointly figure out the source of the monster outbreak. Hearing his answer, Cardiff's eyes widened and a satisfied smirk played on her face, as if confirming her suspicion. She suddenly burst out laughing, which completely flustered the young man. The commander told her assistant that her prediction was correct. Minato was not connected to the unknown group of people, and her intuition hadn't failed her again. Minato cautiously asked what she meant, and Cardiff continued, saying their enemies would never willingly hand over a crystal of doom for analysis. With her hand on the hilt of her sword, she continued to smile. Taking Minato's hand, she made him stand up. The young man realized that Cardiff's suspicions weren't about creating the tunnel or not destroying the red egg with them, but about a completely unknown group of people. With a single swing of her sword, she managed to shatter the metal shackles, freeing the young man's hands. Cardiff, returning her sword to its sheath, apologized for him having to experience such an unpleasant situation. His arrest, she explained, was for his own safety. If he had openly carried the stone, unknown people in the city would certainly have tried to rob him. Minato was surprised that this unknown group posed such a danger. Suddenly, Cardiff hugged him tightly, thanked him on behalf of the guild for saving them, and asked if he wanted to know more about those people. Freeing himself from her tight embrace, the young man replied that he wanted to know the reason for their pursuit. Cardiff then passed the explanation to her assistant, much to his indignation. After that, the girl carelessly said goodbye and, opening the door, left the room, while the assistant tried in vain to stop her. The guild employee just sighed wearily. Minato, stretching his hands, understood that the blame for destroying the egg was obvious and decided to take the shackles with him. The blonde young man turned to him in confusion. Minato noted that the one Cardiff called leader still didn't believe in his innocence. Then he briefly asked the dark-haired man if he had ever heard of the invisible hand of the machine. The leader silently waited for an explanation, while Minato assumed they were talking about a ghost or one of its variations. But his guess was wrong, and the leader just sighed tiredly, realizing that the young man didn't understand the core of the issue at all. The leader looked at Minato, confirming that he truly wasn't an ally of that group. Pushing his chair back, he breathed a sigh of relief, glad that he hadn't died, a fact the dark-haired man didn't grasp. Sitting down at the table, the leader explained that if Minato had been an ally of that group, they would have had to fight, admitting that victory certainly wouldn't have gone to the blonde. He saw Minato as a grim and cold-blooded mage. These thoughts made the leader involuntarily tremble, expressing his desire to finally leave that place. But such a grim portrayal didn't surprise Minato at all. He was just an ordinary guy who wandered around with a pickaxe. The leader began to explain that the invisible hand of the machine was the name of a criminal organization whose actions the guild considered among the most dangerous at the moment. And now they believed that members of this organization were hiding in the territory of Mayas. Minato immediately remembered his intuition, which had lingered with him for a long time. He added that ever since arriving in Mayas, he had felt someone watching him. Minato was right, as the leader himself had been observing him. The blonde admitted that he had been watching Minato since his arrival due to suspicions about his possible membership in a dangerous organization. Minato was even indignant that the leader had suspected him from the start. The young man, pressing his lips together in displeasure, remarked that such an attitude made him seem like a criminal. Sighing, he admitted that it hurt him and asked the leader for a clear explanation. The leader pulled a small piece of paper from his belt, handed it to Minato, and asked him to look at its contents. The dark-haired mage unfolded the paper. On this paper was a magic circle designed to supply water. Minato pondered the drawing's similarity. Its structure resembled the magic circles of the former world more than those here. He was sure this circle was created by artificial intelligence, not by human hands. The leader asked how the young man knew that this circle was for water supply, to which Minato replied that he understood it from the patterns. That's why the blonde suspected the mage of being a member of such a dangerous organization. as almost no one else was capable of reading the circles used by the organization, and they usually couldn't be deciphered. As it turned out, this organization used such unknown magic, while Minato was just an ordinary stranger who wielded 5 elements and used ancient magic. Now he understood the leader's suspicions. The leader explained that with the help of a magic circle, the invisible hand of the machine had flooded an entire city. 2,000 people died, and this was an unforgivable crime, unthinkable using ordinary magical techniques. The leader slammed his fist on the paper describing the weapon. He angrily declared that there were many such incidents, and the number of victims had long exceeded 10,000, threatening to reach even higher numbers. Minato, noticing how angry his interlocutor had become, remarked that such actions went beyond what a criminal group would do. He suggested that the organization might be responsible for the monster outbreaks that attacked cities. Folding the paper, the leader briefly replied that they had predicted as much. The organization had targeted their city, and they couldn't let them continue to act with impunity. He asked Minato for help with something. The leader wanted to explain, but Minato spoke first. He warned that if it was a request to go to a life-threatening place, he would refuse. The leader froze, assuring him that he wasn't going to ask for anything like that. He said he wanted Minato to tell them any information that might be related to the criminals. Minato was surprised by such a simple request. The leader, in turn, quickly assured him that they would pay well for any information provided. But Minato was curious why he was asked, assuming he was still seen as a suspicious person. The dark-haired man was indignant because if they really needed such power, he wanted to know their reason for approaching him, an outsider. The leader only tried to convince him, assuring him that his abilities belonged to the highest class of magic. Then Minato asked directly if the leader thought there might be people from the organization hiding within the guild itself. This question was unexpected and greatly surprised his interlocutor. The leader admitted his guess. That's why they had hidden everything with the arrest. They made it look like they were accusing him of provoking monsters, covering up the fact that a criminal organization existed. But the young man quickly declined the offer, stating that it was beyond his power to identify spies. The leader immediately tried to stop him, saying that the discussion of this matter should only be entrusted to Cardiff herself or to guild members wearing the stone, which the young man then showed Minato. Minato examined the stone, seeing nothing unusual in it, and he suggested that the members might be using it as some kind of signal. Minato realized that signals were being transmitted by ordinary stones. No one would notice a lost pebble if a bag was stolen, but also no one would pull out an ordinary stone during a conversation. The leader was increasingly surprised by the young man's perceptiveness. He asked Minato what education he had received before he tied his fate to the guild and the life of an adventurer. He assured the young man that he would stop pursuing him and wanted him to trust them. Minato, after thinking it over, admitted to himself that if they only needed him to provide information, there was no reason to refuse. Besides, he wanted to learn more about the organization itself and its members. The dark-haired man agreed to help, saying he would definitely pass on the relevant information to them. The leader, tilting his head, thanked Minato for his cooperation. Minato, picking up his notebook, asked if he could remove the shackles now. He removed the shackles with flame magic, using something from his notebook. The metal melted, but such a demonstration greatly frightened the leader. The young man admitted in a trembling but stern voice that it was precisely because of such scenes that Minato seemed so suspicious, inspiring both admiration and apprehension. Leaving the room, the leader decided to personally show Minato the hidden exit from the underground passage. Leading him to a massive mechanical elevator, he deftly lifted the heavy iron door upwards and stepped inside. Once inside the cabin, which was enclosed only by rough iron bars, the leader noted that there were no signs of surveillance at the moment. Then he pulled a rusty lever, and a sharp jolt made Minato flinch all over. The elevator slowly began to ascend, accompanied by an unpleasant creaking and trembling of metal, taking them directly to the only exit to the surface. Stopping at the desired level, they carefully exited the cabin. The leader walked ahead while Minato, pausing for a moment, glanced into the dark abyss of the shaft where even the bottom was not visible and then returned. The leader warned him to be careful in the city. Reaching a massive door, the leader opened it and invited Minato to pass through. Beyond the door opened into the lively guild hall, a tavern where adventurers sat at tables, leisurely eating hot food and sipping from their small barrel-shaped mugs. Minato surveyed the spacious room and was surprised by how lively the atmosphere was. It seemed everyone who wanted to know the details of how they managed to deal with the recent monster invasion had gathered here. As Minato scanned the crowd, he suddenly noticed that the leader had skillfully blended in and disappeared from his sight, leaving the young man alone. The dark-haired man assumed that the guy might have intentionally made himself less conspicuous to avoid attracting the enemy's attention. The leader's face itself was hard to remember. Minato agreed with the guy's possible tactic and decided not to stand out in the crowd either, pulling up his hood and lowering his gaze. Suddenly, he heard his name being called from the crowd by Amy and Maina, who were searching for him. Spotting the girls, he decided to hide from them, ducking behind the broad back of an adventurer, as it wasn't the best time to be seen by his companions. He kept his face down, trying not to draw attention. He knew that if the girls saw him, they would surely shout his name too loudly, which would attract everyone around. At first, he didn't understand how they knew where he was, but then he remembered Amy's sense of smell. Minato also wanted to meet them and talk, as the girls had been genuinely worried about him all this time. Moving a little further, he crouched down and hid behind a large barrel while the girls walked around the tavern, continuing to call his name. He felt a tormenting sense of guilt for making them so anxious. At that moment, the leader suddenly appeared right above the barrel and calmly asked what was bothering Minato. The dark-haired mage silently pointed towards the girls, indicating that he had to hide from them. Seeing the girls, the leader understood that the young man wanted to see the knowledge seekers without any fuss. He headed towards Maina and Amy, asking Minato to wait where he was. Upon seeing the leader, the girls became indignant and demanded their comrade back, believing the guild had unfairly arrested him. However, the leader, remaining calm, listened carefully to their sharp words and managed to quell their anger, causing them to gradually quiet down. The leader returned to the hiding young man, tapped on the barrel, and he poked his head out, seeing the girls in front of him. When they finally found Minato, the girls couldn't hold back their overwhelming emotions. Tears of joy welled up in their eyes, and they were ready to loudly exclaim his name. But they quickly restrained themselves, hastily covering their mouths with their hands. Instead of a greeting, they all punched him in the torso. Minato didn't expect this, but he understood it was just an expression of their anger and worry. Smiling with genuine warmth, he said he was glad to see Maina and Amy unharmed. The girls mumbled something, covering their mouths with their palms, trying not to attract unnecessary attention. Minato didn't understand their words, but he felt how much they had worried. Soon, Maina, remembering something, leaned in and whispered important words directly into his ear. After that, they left the guild and said their goodbyes. Minato, smiling slightly, waved to them, remaining at the entrance next to the leader, who silently observed the scene. The leader quietly asked if he was sure about his decision, as the girls had suggested leaving Maya's and exploring the ruins together. Minato just silently scratched the back of his head, not giving a direct answer. He admitted that he had once truly wanted to explore the ruins with Amy and Maina, encountering new adventures along the way, but now he saw the situation completely differently. But he was afraid that if he rejoined their team, he might accidentally blurt out what happened in the underground prison, and he didn't want to involve the girls in this dangerous matter. The leader thanked Minato for staying in the city to help them deal with the organization. After taking a few steps forward, Minato turned back to the blonde, but the leader was already heading back into the guild. He only asked the dark-haired young man to come to the reception area in 3 days, promising to share important knowledge that might be useful in the future. 3 days later, Minato arrived at the reception area as the leader had requested. He stood before the administrative counter and wondered what the guild employee had prepared for him, as he was trembling with excitement, having put in so much effort to destroy the red crystal of doom. The blonde woman in glasses, who was in charge of the guild's reception, recognized the young man in front of her. She congratulated the mage on achieving D rank, noting that it was the fastest promotion in history. Minato, however, stood silently, showing no reaction to the guild's congratulations. The woman noticed that the young man wasn't particularly thrilled and assured him that it was an incredible achievement. Minato quickly replied that he was indeed happy, but he didn't quite understand the ranking system. Promoting to D rank usually took more time than it had for him, and he suspected the leader might have been behind it. The woman handed him a card with his new rank. He thought to himself that the young man was actually a good person, and the fact that he had shown him a secret passage connecting the basement to the guild proved he could be trusted. Smiling, he felt that the new rank alone would be more beneficial to the young man than money. The woman bent down and tried to lift a massive box by herself. Struggling to keep her balance, she managed to drag it to the table and, exhaling with relief, said that it was a special reward sent from the higher management. Seeing the sealed box in front of him, he assumed this might be his real reward. Minato dragged the heavy box to his room, where he carefully placed it on the round wooden table. Overwhelmed with curiosity, he began to examine the box closely. The woman had previously explained that the box was equipped with a seal, granting access to its contents only to its owner. Minato noted the strict control and doubted that the contents could be a monetary reward. He decided to place his hand on the seal with interest. Upon touch, the seal began to dissolve, and the young man was able to open the lid of the box, from which something immediately sparkled. Inside the box was an enormous, uncountable amount of gold coins. Opening his magic storage, he decided to transfer the contents of the box there. He was interested in the total amount of the reward. Among the gold coins flying upwards, he unexpectedly noticed a letter. He quickly reached out and grabbed it. There was no sender's name on the letter, and Minato assumed it might be a simple receipt. He unfolded it to read the contents. At first glance, the sheet appeared blank, but soon letters began to emerge. It turned out to be an investigation progress report, thanking Minato for his cooperation and informing him that the crystal had been artificially created. This meant that an invisible machine hand had indeed tried to destroy this region by causing a monster outbreak. A chill ran down the young man's spine at the realization. The report also mentioned his reward of 100 million zigs, which were in the box, and the return of the Crystal of Doom to him. The interim reward implied the possibility of an even greater reward, but Minato was more surprised that the crystal itself was being returned to him. If the organization members found out he had it, they might think Minato had deliberately sabotaged their plans. However, after carefully inspecting the box, he did not find the dangerous crystal inside. He found a false bottom in the box where the crystal lay with an additional note. Minato was surprised that he was given something that had been so cleverly hidden. The note stated that he could secretly use the crystal or sell it by contacting the Zessel company. Turning the sheet over, he noticed a map on the back with the company's marked location. After carefully studying the map, he meticulously left the box and letter in the room. As Minato headed for the exit, he paused for a moment, deciding to destroy the letter itself to avoid leaving any unnecessary traces. Taking the letter in his hands, he conjured a flame with a finger from his other hand and set the paper ablaze, skillfully getting rid of the evidence. Instead of keeping the Crystal of Doom, Minato decided to sell it and headed out into the bustling city. Pulling up his hood, he tried not to draw attention and moved in the direction of the Zessel company. After a long journey, he found himself behind the noisy crowd in a quiet alley, where he could safely take off his hood. The young man went to the specified address, thinking that if the company truly dealt with the secret buying and selling of dangerous crystals, the shop should be something impressive, designed for rich and renowned enthusiasts. However, reality surprised him as the shop turned out to be a small, inconspicuous counter, completely lost among the tall, majestic houses that lined the street and emphasized its modesty. Peering through the window, he noticed only one unassuming counter inside. There was also a neatly spread carpet on the floor, and a shelf with jars was visible nearby. A door was located not far from it. Compared to the shop next to the guild, it only had 30% of their inventory, and Minato admitted that the place looked like it was on the verge of going out of business at any second. He checked the map again to make sure he had come to the right place. The creak of an opening door then echoed. The door of the small shop was opened by a short old man with braided beards, dressed in mage robes. He raised his gaze to the arriving customer. Minato immediately understood that the old man needed to be shown an unremarkable stone as a signal. After examining the young man's stone, the old man took his own stone from his pocket. Minato was now convinced that this was indeed the shop indicated on the back of the letter, but he was still surprised by such a small space. As if reading the young man's thoughts, the old man replied that the shop was intentionally built small, which surprised the young man. He introduced himself as Zessel, holding the signal stone